Good afternoon, everyone. If I can please ask all of you to take your seats so that we can get started. Hello. Okay, thanks. I think everybody is here, so we'll get started. So first of all, I would like to welcome the Director General of the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, Mr. Moketsi Ramasori, who is here representing the Minister, Toko Didiza, as well as ambassadors and high commissioners, members of the diplomatic corps, representatives from the South African government, and then all our esteemed guests. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Global Food Security Index 2021 launch, supported by Corteva Agri-Science, the United States Department of Agriculture, as well as Agri-SA. I'm Danine Erasmus, the editor of Farmers Weekly, and I will guide us through today's program. First, some house rules. The bathroom is right across from this hall that we're sitting in. So if you need to use the facilities, please feel free to get up and do so. We will have a short break right before we go into the panel discussion, so you can keep that in mind as well. Due to the COVID-19 regulations, there's only 5 people allowed at each table. So Ferdi, don't sit with your friends, make new friends. Then also, no photographs are to be taken of people without their permission. And then for today's event, I'm sure some of you will be very happy to know we are not allowing any social media. This is a great opportunity to, for once, just put your cell phone away after switching it to silence, and then just focusing on one thing that's happening right in front of you. At the back of the venue, there's also some cold beverages that you're welcome to help yourselves to as we go through the program. And we encourage everyone to stay on afterwards for some networking and refreshments. Okay. I was reading through a report recently by the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations on antimicrobial resistance, and I came across this piece of information. So over the next 30 years, the world is expected to produce the same amount of food as it has produced for the last 10,000 years combined. A statement like this is difficult to comprehend in practical terms, but it does leave us with some impression of the enormity of the challenge we are facing. When I look at a statement like that, the question that screams out at me immediately is, how can we possibly achieve this without completely destroying the planet? And of course, even if we do manage to produce the volume of food that is required, we would still have only solved part of the challenge. Because what we already know very well, and South Africa is a good example of this, that just producing enough food for everyone does not mean that no one will be left hungry. Once we have solved availability, we still need to address access and affordability. And these are some of the issues which we will delve into today during the various presentations and discussions. The 2021 Global Food Security Index has shown that global food security is declining despite our growing ability to produce more food. But before we get to the rest of the program, I would welcome to the stage to open proceedings Mr. Ali Abdi, the Minister Counselor for Agricultural Affairs at the Embassy of the United States in South Africa. He will introduce our first speaker, who will be Todd Haskell, the Charge d'Affaires from the Embassy of the United States in South Africa.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you in person, right here, not virtually. My name is Ali Abdi. I'm the Agricultural Counselor at the U.S. Embassy in Pretoria. I arrived here about at the end of June 2021. Prior to South Africa, I was in North Africa. I served in North Africa, Southeast Asia, just to give a little background, West Africa, and our headquarters in Washington, D.C., at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. While in Nigeria, I picked up an important phrase that saves time, and that is, all protocols are duly observed. Global Food Security Index is an important event, and we've had good collaboration with this report. My first interaction with the Global Food Security Index dates back to 2014 or 2015, while I was in Indonesia. At that time, of course, DuPont AgriScience supported the Global Food Security Index. And now we're happy to collaborate with, or continue that collaboration with, Corteva and Gfsi. I would like to thank Gfsi and Corteva for organizing this forum. Today, we're delighted to have with us our charge, Mr. Todd Haskell. Mr. Haskell joined Mission South Africa as the charge in March 2021. He recently served as the United States Ambassador to the Republic of Congo from July 2017 to January 2021. In his 35-year career in the Foreign Service, Mr. Haskell held several senior-level positions, both in the field and in Washington, D.C. Most notably, he worked with U.S. embassies and agencies in Washington to implement the Mandela Washington Fellowship, the signature program of the Youth Africa Leaders Initiative. Equally important, I can tell you that he's a big fan of agriculture. And now I invite Charge d'Affaires, Todd Haskell, to the podium to make his remarks. Thank you.
Thanks, Ali. A big fan of agriculture. I can tell you that on the eve of the American Thanksgiving celebration, I'm going to do my part to eat as much of it as I can. Again, I'll do the all protocol observed, but I will acknowledge the Director General, Ramasotti, who's with us here today, as well as representatives from the agricultural industry across South Africa, Gfsi, and of course Corteva, and everybody that's here in the room. I think we're all working on the same things. Good afternoon. It's a great honor and a pleasure to join you this afternoon to launch the 10th edition of the Global Food Security Index. The GFSI is an incredible tool. It aids our understanding of the affordability, availability, quality, and safety of our food. GFSI data provides us insights into the challenges and the strengths and allows us to propel our world towards the UN Sustainable Development Goal of zero hunger by 2030. As we celebrate the 10th anniversary of GFSI, we should reflect on how its scores have evolved over the past decade. And when we look at the global data, we see a positive story. Our countries and our world have made strides in enhancing the food security of our people, with the vast majority of countries over the last 10 years improving their scores since the inception of GFSI. Among the many drivers of this improvement is the research and innovation that has gone into improving global agricultural productivity. South Africa is an influential biotechnology leader on the continent and one of the world's largest producers of genetically engineered crops. Like the United States, South Africa has advanced the use of these technologies that reduce agricultural inputs and improve yields, helping increase the availability and affordability of food, not only for South African citizens, but across Africa, and of course for consumers around the world. It's my sincere hope that our nations together, South Africa and the United States, will continue to push forward the kinds of innovations that will keep our world on this positive trajectory. But it's not going to be easy. The rapid gains we've made in recent years, we've all, of course, gone through the pandemic. Even if we are here together, I don't think we have finally passed the end of it. And while we are turning the corner, climate change looms large as a growing threat to global food security. Agriculture, that's why I appreciate so much South African leadership at the recent COP26 in terms of the just energy transition. And we're thrilled to be involved with working with South Africa, along with our European partners, on moving forward on that. Agriculture faces the daunting challenge of producing more food to meet the nutritional needs of a growing population, while simultaneously dealing with climate change and tightened restraints on resources. In recognition of this challenge, this year's GFSI is the first to incorporate natural resources and resilience into the main index. As we look to the decade ahead, we'll need a global coalition of policymakers, farmers, and scientists. Probably doesn't look very different from this room that I'm looking at right now, who can deliver on the potential of agricultural productivity and resilience through a holistic approach that prioritizes conservation and efficiency. Many of you will form part of that coalition, and I'd like to thank you all for your interest in food security, and to thank Gfsi and Corteva for bringing us together to further engage on this important topic. Corteva's sponsorship of the GFSI underscores their commitment to combating food insecurity. These are the scientists whom we need in our global coalition, the individuals who are helping farmers generate more on the land and searching for new ways to increase resilience. Thank you again, and we're delighted, and I'm delighted, to get a chance to partner with all of you on this important endeavor. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those opening remarks, and thanks again to the Embassy of the US for partnering with Gfsi to present this day. Next, we're going to have an opening address from the department. So I'm really delighted to present to the stage the recently appointed Director General of the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, Gfsi Ramasodi, who's been with the department for several years, serving formerly as the Deputy Director General of Agricultural Production, Health and Food Safety. He's here to present the message from the Minister, Toko Didiza. Welcome, Mr. Ramasodi.
Thank you very much, Medinin. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me start off by passing on the message from the Minister who could not be here. But it also turned out to be a joke of the afternoon. This afternoon, while making last touches to the speech that the Minister had to do today, I asked them to send it to me. So with the salutations, there's also a special word of welcome to President Uhuru Kenyatta. And I asked the colleagues, why do we have this? They say, no, he will be here. What the colleagues did not see is that the minister could not be here because she's going to receive the president at the airport. So they thanked the minister for being here. I thought that was a joke for the day that I should share with you. Program Director, let me recognize on behalf of the minister in this hall, all the ambassadors who are here, without naming because I don't know who else is here. Let me also recognize the diplomatic corps who are here. Let me recognize the captains of our industry who are here. I see quite a lot of them here. I would also like to recognize the host, the USDA, Agri-SA, and Koteva, and in our own contribution to the diplomatic language or protocol observed. South Africa, like all other African countries, has agriculture as the mainstay for the economic development, and it continues to occupy a very pivotal and critical role in the food and nutrition security space. Agriculture also has, during COVID-19, continued to show very significant growth. Agriculture in 2020 grew by 13.1%. It also continued to grow in the second quarter of 2021, and it also showed that in the very same quarter, corresponding quarter, the second quarter, that it just created just under 70,000 jobs. So when we are talking about this sector, we are talking about a sunrise sector, a sector that is currently very resilient and it's on its way up. And I hope that each and every one of us who's in this hall would be carrying this message that agriculture is on the up, and everybody has got that with them. You have seen also the confidence index that has been done by AGBIS, how it has shown over just a few months ago that we are on the up as agriculture. South Africa also had very broad consultations in preparation for the UN food systems, that our food systems are primarily driven by environmental as well as socio-economic factors. And this is true to the introduction that was done by the program director earlier on when she was referring on the food that we needed to have over a period of time. And therefore, if we have got to look at the UNFSS dialogue, it is quite important that we need to live as South Africans to the constitutional promise that says that we have got to improve the quality of life of all our citizens if we know the real definition of what food security is, looking at the 5 aspects that have been spelled out, and I don't want to go on a repetition for emphasis of those. A pursuit for Africa to transform this food security status is espoused in the Malabo Declaration and the African Union Commission's Agenda 2063, which is themed, I quote, "The future we want for Africa," close quote. Agenda 2063 makes a direct fundamental contribution on the plight of millions who are food insecure in the continent. And this sector has proven over and over its mettle as the heartbeat of our economy. And in the advent of COVID-19, the programs that we have had in agriculture has assisted us in terms of moving the needle forward. The Ministry of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development acknowledges the results of the Global Food Security Index, which indicate that South Africa is now ranked 70th position out of 113 countries, from position 69 in 2020, and longer than ranking 44 in 2019. This is a source of concern. And now, if you have got to look at the definition of food security, you'll understand that it's not only the availability of food, it's also the affordability of food, it's access to food. It's other issues around food safety that we have got to look at. It's also the issue around climate change. And therefore, this discussion comes at an opportune time that we have got to look at this. South Africa, as you all know, is generally food secure at country level, but is characterized by food insecurities at household level. As we know, food security is more than what we know about sufficient supplies. It is also about accessibility, affordability, nutrition, and stability over time. Added to these sub-indices for the Global Food Security Index is the quality and safety of food and climate change coupled with natural resources and resilience. However, it is not all doom and gloom. South Africa continues to excel in one of the sub-indices used to measure the global food security, and this is on food availability. The disaggregated data is shared by some of our partners. In this case, my friend Fedi from Bfap sitting, and I hope that you are social distancing now, shows that field crops made the biggest positive contribution to the total agricultural gross value of production in Q2 of 2021, with 96 increase compared to Q2 of 2020. Maize is the largest contributor to the GPF of field crops and increased by 166% year on year. This remarkable development for producers is that even though prices are already trading at export parity levels, international prices have increased to such an extent that to even deal with the appreciation in the rand. White maize and yellow maize prices are expected to increase by a further 7.4 and 15% respectively in 2021. However, on the flip side, we are experiencing high costs in terms of our inputs. And we are also experiencing high costs in terms of the biggest contributor in terms of fuel within the industry. We are looking at the Crop Estimates Committee of the 28th August 2021, where the expected commercial maize crop has been set at 16,000 tons. 16,316 million. No, let me not do a zoomer now. 16 million tons, which is 7% more than the 15 million tons of the previous season. This is the second largest expected maize crop ever produced in South Africa. During the above mentioned SSI of maize, which is one of those that we have got to look at, we have been very positive, all above 100 over this period, meaning that the country is producing above levels of consumption and it is able to also export, especially to the region. The country will therefore continue to have ample maize supply to meet demand and be able to export. This has been underpinned by favorable weather conditions and is beneficial as maize is one of the staple crops in our country. If we have got to look at sugar as the self-sufficient commodity except for 2015 and 2016, when severe drought conditions in KZN impacted on this, the sector negatively experienced a negative SSI during that period. But you would know that the Department of Trade and Industry and Competition is currently busy with the Sugar Master Plan, which is meant to deal with the issues around sugar. And we, from our side, in terms of the Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan, we will continue in dealing with the issues of addressing areas of the Sugar Master Plan. To this end also, the South African government, under the leadership of Deputy President, His Excellency Mr. David Mabuza, is specifically addressing the policy commitments for food access. We have in the presidency a committee that is leading at addressing all issues that are related to nutrition and also economics in the interdepartmental working arrangement, which is meant to deal with food security. So at government level, we are looking at those. On the other side, we also have got a social compact that we are currently addressing with our industries through the Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan. The role of the Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan is to create an enabling environment for economic growth, the empowerment of the ordinary citizens from poverty, and the significance of having an industry that is based on decent work. Commercial and smallholder farmers, as well as large and small and informal agribusinesses, should coexist in this sector. And you would agree with me that since 1994, and even with the advent of Batat then, we have been grappling with this issue of the dual economy in our agricultural sector. And I think that the Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan will assist us to deal with this dualism. The robust economic growth at the height of the pandemic from last year until now is a testament to the sector's resilience to power and the economic performance of our sector as previously indicated. You would know that South Africa participated at the UN food security systems, and we had agreed during the consultations which the captains of this industry were at, that we are going to have a transformed food system, but it will be based on the following. One, improved access to land. The expansion of farmland is critical towards strengthening the agricultural sector in South Africa. And you would know that the private sector has been involved in terms of crafting what we call the land donations policy, which we will be consulting very soon. But we will also be accelerating in terms of the land reform programs that we are having as a department, both from a restitution, redistribution, and tenure reform basis. Secondly, we need to deal with the issue that was raised earlier on coping with climate change. The country is continuously developing and implementing adaptive strategies to cope with climate change and the challenge of water scarcity, as most of our land is arid and semi-arid. The farming methods that we are implementing, such as precision agriculture, conservation agriculture, climate-smart farming, and urban agriculture are considered as approaches that we can utilize to deal with this aspect. It is very important that we have got to also look at our science institutions and science councils, such as the ARC and the CSIR, universities and the private sector, academia, to come up with programs that will assist this country to deal with this issue around climate change. We have, and we are acutely aware of our deposition as a country at the COP26 that just finished a week ago, and that included our agricultural point of view. And we hope that we will be implementing to ensure that agriculture also takes lead in terms of the just transition. In terms of supporting, the third one is supporting local production for local consumption. South Africa is currently producing what it does not consume and consuming what it does not produce. And I'm making a typical example around rice and wheat as two examples that I can go to. But it's important that we localize the value chains within our country. And one of those areas that we are looking at is coming up with master plans. One of those master plans is the poultry master plan. And the other master plans that will assist us in localizing our food systems and our food value chains. The fourth area is around food safety. Food safety is prioritized for food products that are imported and exported, while local food production by smallholder and subsistence farmers is equally receiving attention it requires. While we note the work that is being done within the AU, specifically around the Specialized Technical Committee on Agriculture, Rural Development, and Water and Environment, on setting up a food safety agency for the AU, I think it's about time that we also move faster on the issues that we had previously raised around setting up our own food safety system to ensure that there's better coordination or even a single command system that when we deal with the issues around food safety. Fifthly, we need to build networks of resilience to vulnerabilities, shocks, and stresses. And COVID has already shown us that these are the areas that we have got to concentrate on. We need to build social infrastructure, relationships, and networks that would be future-proofed, and we will be able to ensure that we build forward better post-COVID-19. We also need to support, sixthly, the ecosystem resilience. We ensure that there is continued productivity of natural ecosystems through improved land and water use planning and environmental governance. All of these would need to promote food security. The issue of addressing the interfaces that are the land, water, environment, and energy are very important in terms of how we deal with the issues around resilience. The seventh issue that we need to look at, and I know those who are within the animal health and plant health would agree with me that if we don't have effective biosecurity systems, whichever system that we come up with on the food systems would not be able to hold water. Government, business, and communities should maintain effective biosecurity systems across the entire food system, and with the capability of early recognition of the pests and diseases, continuous diagnostic and surveillance, control, and neutralize to ensure credibility and success of our sectors. The Minister has pronounced on the biosecurity task team that is currently being led by Dr. Shadrach Moyepudi, who are dealing with the current issues that we are having in the system. And we're looking forward to receiving that report that would guide on the few issues that we think are of importance to us building a credible food system in our country. In conclusion, we are all aware that the President has pronounced on the Economic Reconstruction and Recovery Plan way back in 2020. Each and every intervention that we are making as government is meant to ensure that there is a climate that is meant to assist the farming community, assist communities in terms of ensuring that at a very high level there are interventions. We are also guided by the Presidential Coordinating Commission on Climate Change to ensure that the just transition discussions happen in a space and time that would allow us broader consultation. We think that we will be, through this commission, be able to address the issues around low carbon economy and climate resilient society. I would like to thank the invitation that was extended to the Honorable Minister. Once again, offer the apologies of the Minister, and thank you very much for affording the department the opportunity to address you this afternoon. Thank you.
Mr. Ramaswamy, thank you very much for that. And now that you're new in the role, I do want to wish you only the very best for the next couple of years as the department seriously goes into the implementation phase of the master plans. That I do trust that you will be able to rally everyone in the department behind you to make sure that the changes that are necessary in our value chains will be affected as it's envisaged in these master plans. And then we move on to hear from one of the people who represents a group that we often don't hear enough from when it comes to the global stage and the discussion of food security and climate change, and that's from the farmers themselves. So I want to introduce Jaco Minnaar, who will also give an opening message from the South African agricultural industry. Jaco grew up and he still lives on a farm in Botesrust in the Hennenman district in the Free State, where he farms with maize, soybeans, dry beans, sunflower, livestock and game. A very busy farm. Jaco completed a degree in agricultural engineering at the University of Pretoria in 1998. In 2011, he was elected as director of Senves and Senves Bell, a position which he still holds. He is a former chairperson of Grain South Africa, and he was recently elected or promoted from his role as vice president of Agri SA to the new president of Agri South Africa. So welcome to the stage, Jaco.
Thank you very much, Deneen. Thanks also for the opportunity. Yeah, you don't hear a lot about us because we're farming. We're busy producing the food that we need to secure this food security in the world. Director General of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, Mr. Ramaswamy, ambassadors and high commissioners, members of the diplomatic corps and representatives from the South African government, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen. Today we have the privilege to launch the Global Food Security Index of 2021 in the presence of various key stakeholders in the South African food system. The Gfsi is a benchmarking tool developed by Economist Impact and supported by the leading multinational agricultural company, Corteva Agriscience. The index is constructed from 58 unique indicators that analyze the underlying drivers and causes of food security across 113 countries. It's my hope that we can take this opportunity today to critically reflect on these factors and inform the plight of the nation. Global food security is central to many societal challenges of our era, such as climate change, a growing population growth, structural inequality, and societal security. In South Africa, we are fortunate to have a well-established and resilient food security food system that not only sustains local food security levels, but that contributes significantly to the regional food supply. According to Stats SA's agricultural census of 2017, commercial agriculture consists of 40,000 farms. This does not take into account the more than 300,000 smallholder commercial operations. Moreover, Stats SA General Household Survey indicated that a further 2.3 million households participate in some form of agricultural production activity. In the secondary agricultural value chain, we have advanced logistical and distribution networks, food processing and manufacturing companies, both small and large, that is a critical link to the consumers. In recent years, agriculture has proven itself as a resilient and shining light in the economy, particularly during COVID-19 economic turndown. In 2020, the South African economy contracted by 7%. In contrast, the agricultural sector expanded by 13.1% in real terms and realized a trade surplus of $4 billion. Despite various unprecedented challenges along the supply chain, the food system largely remained stable. However, economic growth remains low, unemployment is at an all-time high, and household income under immense pressure, resulting in the cold reality that less than half of the South Africans can afford a healthy diet. This is also comprehensively ventilated in the GFSI report. Whilst there are many macroeconomic and systemic factors that drive the food security, from an agricultural perspective, there is an enormous opportunity for our industry to grow and to continue to deliver a social responsibility in its economic enterprise, which includes producing quality food in a sustainable manner. In 2021 Bfap Agricultural Outlook, a benchmarking of the curve scenario is sketched that I believe could give us hope. The scenario has been simulated based on the list of key interventions and reforms that were identified during the agricultural and agro-processing master plan process. Under this scenario, the total gross production value from agriculture could increase a further 32 billion in real terms above the baseline for 2030. And the share of black farmer output of production could increase to 20% in most of the industry, where transformation has been lagging. Successful transformation will result in an increased number of smallholder farmers who are able to produce for the local markets and ensure regional food security, and where possible and viable, link into the formal and tailor-made value chain and grow their businesses. To make this a reality, we need all stakeholders in agricultural ecosystem on board. Each of us will have to take ownership of the role we occupy in the ecosystem and bring about the following: a stable and conducive policy and investment environment, a comprehensive, sufficient and predictable infrastructure and services including electricity, roads, water, and a well-functioning municipalities. Effective service delivery, for example, trade affairs, port authorities, veterinarian services, biosecurity protocols, plant health, and the Agricultural Research Council. Comprehensive and effective farmer support programs. I'm excited and looking forward to our engagement today, but I want to encourage everyone to keep the discussion about the plight of the nation alive afterwards. Let us continue to use the GFSI to measure our progress. Recently, I read that a decade ahead is being compared to what we know as the roaring 1920s. This was a time of great economic and social disturbance after World War I, and as well as the innovations that formed the basis of what unfolded in the rest of the 20th century. Looking ahead, I want to believe that we are soon going to be at the tail end of the global pandemic, but the pace of economical, environmental and social change and innovation will only accelerate. As South African agriculture stakeholders, we should harness the current winds of change and ensure that the decade ahead, just like a century ago, is also roaring. We can only achieve this if we share a common vision of the future. I thank you.
Thanks for that, Yaku, and all the best for the planting season. You're probably hopefully mostly in the ground by now. So that's why you can be here today, thanks to the early rain. Next, we will have an opening message that's going to be delivered virtually by Venkata Sabarao Colli, the President for Africa Middle East for Corteva Agri-Science. Sabarao is based in South Africa. He leads the organization's overall growth strategy across Africa and the Middle East, which has 4 commercial units, namely Southern Africa, East, South, and then also Central Africa, and then Egypt and the Middle East, lastly Northwest and Central Africa. So we can go, oh, he's already behind me, sorry.
Okay. Thank you, Director General, Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, Mr. Ramaswamy, ambassadors and high commissioners, members of the diplomatic corps, representatives from the South African government, representatives from media, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings to all. My name is Subarao. I'm the President of Corteva Agri-Science in Africa, Middle East. Firstly, thank you for joining today's launch event of Global Food Security Index. It's an honor to be here on behalf of Corteva Agri-Science. I'm here today as a representative of our global agriculture industry, and I will share some thoughts on our vision for the future, and in particular, participate in conversations about food security in Africa, Middle East. Firstly, I would like to briefly introduce Corteva Agri-Science. Corteva is the agriculture company born from joining of businesses of Dow Agri-Science, DuPont Crop Protection, and Pioneer. We are a strong innovation company. Towards that, we believe in bringing global science to local innovation. That's aligning with that, we are invested in about 160 research and development facilities all over the globe, and this is also supported by about 100 manufacturing facilities. Our sales people serve millions of farmers of all sizes, smallholder farmers and big farmers in about 140 countries. Extending to Africa, Middle East, we are equally committed here with about 6 research and development facilities spread across Africa, Middle East, and out of them 4 are in South Africa. And equally, we invested in local manufacturing facilities in about 7 sites. Out of them, 3 are in South Africa. We serve in the 50 countries in Africa, Middle East. Largely, the crops that we serve are about 6. Of course, corn is the biggest one that we are in. In addition to that, we also have soybean, sunflower, and lots of fruits and vegetables. And we also bring in crop protection products, about 50 active ingredients. Again, the new innovations are being brought to the farmers as soon as they are launched across the globe. Corteva Agri-Science in Africa, Middle East works to build agriculture resilience by bringing technology and innovation through research and development efforts, as I said. Today, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the launch of the 2021 Global Food Security Index in South Africa. So the latest Global Food Security Index findings is a reminder of the big food security challenges that face our region. Farmers need to produce more in the face of the limited resources. which is also impacted very heavily by the climate change, and you're seeing lots of locusts, pests, and innumerable challenges that we're seeing while to meet the global growing needs. As you know, this region also needs not only more food, but also need to be produced sustainably and also build systems that are resilient and capable of meeting the current global challenges of declining natural resources, malnutrition, poverty, pests, and climate change, and so on. So as an industry leader in agriculture, we are all committed to engaging in important conversations about a range of global issues. This event and the index gives us a tremendous opportunity to do that. For all of us working in agriculture and food production in this region, we know that our work supports farmers to farm sustainably and also to get that product to the market. Our work is cut out for us, for sure, but we also know that we cannot do this alone, and we need lots of collaborations to get this accomplished. So we invite you all to join this conversation and collaborate to build a sustainable food systems for longer term. It's my belief that the insights from this year's GFSI report, as well as the discussions we are hearing today, will inspire and inform our efforts to build a more food secure and sustainable region for generations to come. At Quaterva AgriScience, we intend to be a new kind of actor, one that enriches the lives of those who produce and those who consume, enhancing lives for generations to come. So we strive to be a company that collaborates, as I said, with others to improve the world we live in. All, I would like again to express the gratitude of Quaterva AgriScience for joining us today, and also allowing us to be part of this important dialogue. This work you do will shape the future of South Africa and the continent, of farming and of global agriculture. So with that, I would like to hand over to Pratima Singh from Economist Impact and Tony Esmerald, who will take us through the Global Food Security Index results findings, and for South Africa respectively. They will lead the presentation highlighting findings from the just launched 2021 Global Food Security Index, which Quaterva sponsors. And thank you. Over to you, Pratima.
Thank you very much, Subaru, for that introduction, and good afternoon to everyone joining us today. It's a great pleasure to be here talking to you about...
Tima, can you hear me on your side?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, so I just want to check, do we need Tony Esmeralda on the stage now or after Pratima has finished speaking? Oh, okay, thanks. Please continue, Pratima.
Thanks very much. Thanks, everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for having both myself and Tony. Tony is here with me as well, and he will be with you shortly. Let me just take a moment to introduce myself. My name is Pratima Singh, and I'm a senior manager with Economist Impact, who we produce the Global Food Security Index for 10 years now with the support of Quaterva AgriScience. I lead the Global Food Security Index from the Economist Impact side, and I just kind of want to say thank you to the organizers for having us today to share the findings of the Global Food Security Index, and thank you to all the esteemed guests joining us to have a very important, much needed conversation on the state of global food security globally, and then, of course, in more detail on South Africa. So with that, let me jump right into it. I just want to highlight what we'll be talking about today so you have a sense of what's coming up. We will start by giving you a quick introduction to the GFSI, and then really spend most of our time today taking you through the key findings from the 2021 index, but also in particular 10-year trends that we've been able to analyze as a result of doing this index for a decade now. And then finally, Tony will take us through the South Africa context before we move to the panel discussion, and then of course take any questions. So let's start with the introduction. So I'm very pleased to hear everyone's familiar with the Global Food Security Index. It is, of course, one of the premier indices on measuring the state of global food security across 113 countries. We at Economist Impact, which is part of the Economist Group, have been doing this index since 2012. We started with about 105 countries and have now expanded it to 113 countries. And this index really provides us a global perspective on what is the state of food security in these different countries, which are the countries that are more food secure or less food secure, and essentially really taking a deep dive into some of those trends and vulnerabilities that we're seeing emerging as a result of doing this index for the past 10 years. We take into account the perspectives and views of experts, policymakers, academics, and of course all stakeholders, everyone in this room really, in order to establish the GFSI and create that framework that essentially provides policymakers and any stakeholders a set of best practices, a way to measure progress, and really actionable roadmaps and insights in order to improve food security for their populations. I want to take a little bit of time now to talk a little bit about what really goes into this measure of food security. As we mentioned, it is a framework that's constructed using 58 indicators and sub-indicators that really look at what is the enabling environment for food security across these 113 countries. And we do so by looking at 4 different categories: affordability, which looks at things like the state of income levels and particularly inequality adjusted income in different countries, as well as other measures like food safety nets and of course population under poverty lines. We look at availability, which, as we've also talked about earlier today, is not just looking at the amount of food that's produced, but also how accessible that food is. What is the agricultural infrastructure that is available in these different markets? And then also other social and political barriers to access, like gender inequality, which we know is very closely linked to food insecurity, as well as other metrics. The third category is quality and safety. So it's not just about having food that is available and accessible and also affordable to the population, but also that is nutritious. And we do so by looking at the quality and safety pillar that takes into account things like micronutrient availability, quality of protein, as well as dietary diversity in these different countries. And finally, the fourth pillar on natural resources and resilience. We already mentioned that the fourth category was recently incorporated into the main index. We introduced this category as an adjustment factor, but recently have incorporated it as part of the core index as a fourth standalone pillar in the core index, simply because it is very critical now to acknowledge how closely food security and climate risks are connected. We do not want to make this something that is sort of linked and sort of connected. We wanted to make sure that climate risk and climate risk management becomes an integral part of the conversation, of the dialogue on food security. And we're hoping to do this by incorporating this as a fourth pillar under the core index. The idea of this index is that it's not just tracking outcomes around hunger and malnutrition, but is really measuring what are those inputs, what are those factors that need to come together in order to make a market more food secure. I want to touch base now quickly and take you through the key findings of the 2021 index, and also particularly some of the trends that we have uncovered over the past 10 years in terms of what are the trends we're seeing in food security, what are some of the lessons that we have learned, and how can we encourage more progress on this very critical issue. If we could move to the next slide, please. We've got a first polling question for you all to be able to stay engaged and hopefully test your knowledge on the issues of food security. And I'll pose this to the audience before I share the answer. But the first polling question is, in 2020, what percentage of the global population was estimated to be moderate to severely food insecure? Is it A, 15%, B, 30%, or C, 40%? Thanks everyone for engaging and for attempting to answer this polling question. All right, do we get to see the results? Sure. You can see the answers rolling in. Yes, we have a little less than 2 minutes left on the poll, so if anyone hasn't ventured a guess, please feel free to do so now. Excellent. I see that the majority responses said 30%, and in fact, that is the correct answer. It's almost shocking that 1/3 or a little less than 1/3 of the global population was estimated to be moderate to severely food insecure in 2020. So the fact that we got this right just shows the scale of the problem and the fact that we're all aware of it, and really brings together this group of stakeholders to in order to take some action in order to reduce this number to 15% hopefully, and at some point in order to achieve UN SDGs zero hunger goal to 0% in the not too distant future. All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the high-level findings of the 2021 index by moving to the next slide. What you see in front of you is the average score of 113 countries on the Global Food Security Index for the last 10 years. So from 2012 through to 2021, these are the average scores of the 113 countries on the that are measured in the index. It's interesting to see that we did make quite a bit of progress from 2012 through to 2019. Of course, the rate of progress did start slowing over time, but there was progress for the past 8 years, all the way through to 2019. And then in the last year and 2 years, from 2020 and of course continues on till 2021, we're seeing a bit of a deterioration in the overall global food security environment. And this is, of course, due to a couple of factors, not least COVID-19, but also more structural long-term issues like the presence of conflict and climate variability. These three factors have sort of come together and caused us to reverse some of the gains that we had made, and at least plateau out, if not reverse, some of the gains that we have made in the past 8 years. And so it's critical to sort of sit up and take notice that there is still a lot of room for us to improve as we go forward in terms of enhancing the global environment for food security. When we break down some of this, we see that in terms of the top performers, we see that Europe continues to lead. About 7 out of the 10 countries in the top 10 places are from Europe, and that was the case in 2012, as it is in 2021 as well. Ireland continues to lead the index. It is the top scoring country with a score of about 84 out of 100, and it is the most food secure country in terms of the drivers of food security, according to our 2021 index findings. And then we kind of flip this and look at the other end of the spectrum and look at some of the lowest scoring countries. And again, unsurprisingly, we see that the sub-Saharan African countries continue to dominate the bottom 10 spots, similar to what was the case in 2012. What is really important to note is that there's a huge inequality and there's a very wide disparity between the top scorer and the country that is ranked 113, which is Burundi in this case. Burundi's score is about 34, and when we compare that to the top scorer, Ireland, we see that there is almost a 43% decrease between the difference between the score of Burundi and the score of Ireland. So essentially what we're seeing is that there's a wide variation. So having this conversation at a global level is very critical, because there is still a lot of inequality in how food security is playing out in different regions. If we move to the next page, please. Some of the key findings according to categories also are very important and telling in terms of why we're seeing that dip in the past 2 years at least. If you look at the chart in front of you, you'll see the overall food security index score overall is 60.9. And then on the right-hand side, you'll see the average scores broken down by category. So we see affordability, availability, quality and safety, and natural resources and resilience. Immediately, what we find is that affordability is one of the main reasons that we've seen that decline in the past 2 years. And this is not just a 2-year decline. In fact, affordability scores, we saw that from 2012 to 2016, they in fact improved quite a bit. And in the last 5 years, we've seen that there's been a little bit of a reversal of that trend, and it started decreasing, particularly in the last years. As the pandemic hit, we've seen food safety nets not be equipped. We've seen obviously populations in the poverty line increase, and also we've seen commodity prices and of course in particular cost of food going up. So we've seen a bit of that double whammy almost, if you will, where food prices are increasing while incomes are declining. And so affordability remains a critical area of focus that needs to be prioritized going forward, particularly as we've highlighted in our research this year as well. It is one of the critical sort of factors that are, or important determinants of the prevalence of stunting in children under 5. So if we look at certain outcomes like hunger and prevalence of stunting, we know that categories like affordability and of course quality and safety are very closely correlated with these metrics. The other interesting thing to flag out here is natural resources and resilience. We've mentioned this in the conversations and the discussions earlier today as well, but we've highlighted that you'll see that there's a big discrepancy between some of the higher scoring categories like quality and safety on average versus natural resources and resilience. The average for natural resources is at 50.8, a score of 50.8, and we know for a fact that across almost all of our countries, this remains the lowest performing category. So the key takeaway here is that natural resources and climate risk needs to be prioritized in order to maintain a more globally food secure world and a more resilient food system. The difference between the overall food security score, which is about 60.9, and the natural resources and resilience score, which is about 50.8, is 10 points. And so we really need to improve this category, performance in this category, to boost our overall food security environment. The risks here remain water stress, very imminent across a lot of different countries, as well as threats to oceans, rivers, and lakes. And we're also seeing a need for commitment to agricultural adaptation, and early climate warning measures needs to be prioritized in the agri space. If we move to the next page, please, I'd like to take a little bit of time to talk through how we're seeing some of these trends play out by income groups, because this is obviously an important metric and an important factor in measuring global food security. We do, of course, see that there is a significant linkage between high-income countries and national income remains one of the determinants of global food security, good performance in the index at least. But as you see in the chart in front of you, the high-income countries do lead the index, and of course the lower-income countries are highlighted in green at the bottom there. But what's an interesting finding that I want to flag here is that we do continue to see some progress by lower-income countries in making strides in food security. Of course, a lot of countries had made that progress between 2012 and 16. We've seen a little bit of that decline, at least in the past 5 years, but there is still progress that is being made on this in this particular category of countries. On the other hand, high-income countries, I don't think we can think about food security as a low-income country issue or problem anymore, because we are seeing even in high-income countries that had previously made substantial gains, that their progress in some cases is stagnating and in some cases is in fact declining on the global food security outcomes. So for instance, about 80% of the high-income countries had increased their scores in the initial part of the index in the first 5 years and have started decreasing or at least plateauing in terms of their performance. And a lot of this is, of course, because it's sort of plateaued as a result of growing off of a high base. But there are other factors that we're analyzing that can be critical in determining some of this. So particularly around investment in ag R&D, which is a major contributor to continuous improvement in some of the lower income countries. We're seeing that that's sort of stalled in a lot of the other high income countries, and so that needs to continue to make progress, whether it's through innovation and innovative technologies, collaboration with the private sector, but there are still there's a lot of space to grow even for countries in the higher end of the spectrum. Let's move a little bit and talk about the regional breakdown of the performance in the GFSI. We'll see here that North America, which is highlighted in red, continues to be the top performing region. North America comprises US and Canada. We should see. Hi, sorry about that. Can you hear me? I can continue, yes. As I was saying, North America continues to lead the index. North America comprises the US and Canada, and it has been the top performing country in region in the index. Europe, which obviously comprises about 30 countries, has some of the most or best performers in the index, but also has an average. So we see that Europe is the second region in this index. Sub-Saharan Africa, as I mentioned earlier, is highlighted in dark blue at the bottom there, while Asia, Pacific, Latin America, and the Middle East and Africa regions Middle East and North Africa regions are hovering around the average or the middle there in terms of their performance. And so, of course, regional factors also need to be addressed, and the context of regional global food security environments is also an important aspect to consider as we look at the food security performance across regions. If we could move to the next page, please. The final thing that I want to sort of leave you with is some of the lessons that we have learned following this index or doing this index for 10 years. There are several countries we've seen that have made significant improvements in reducing hunger and their food and improving their food security environment, while there are also some countries where we've seen massive deteriorations or significant declines in the food security environment. So let me start with the former. Some of the countries where we've seen really solid improvements are countries like Tanzania, China, Cambodia, and Kenya. And a lot of that improvement was made by making significant strides in the affordability category by driving down food costs, boosting market access, and implementing efficient safety nets, food safety nets. Similarly, countries in North Africa like Algeria, as well as the Middle East like the UAE and Pakistan, improved their performance in availability. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we see countries like Venezuela, Burundi, Brazil, where it's sort of the almost opposite aspect that sort of took hold, which is affordability took a bit of a hit in these countries, because of which these are the countries that have seen the most significant drops in their food security environment. Venezuela, of course, is a result of conflict and, of course, high food costs and drops in affordability was one of the lowest or the most deteriorated environments in our index for the past 10 years. All right, if we could move to the next page, please. I'm going to hand over to Tony to talk a little bit about the South Africa context. But before I do that, maybe I can ask you another polling question to see if you're sort of familiar with the South Africa context already. So the second question is, despite a score improvement between 2012 and 2021, we did see a drop in the ranking for the country between these two, 2012 and 2021. So your options are, did the ranking of South Africa drop from 48 in 2012 to 67 in 2021? From 67 in 2012 to 69 in 2021, or from 62 in 2012 to 70 in 2021? If I could ask for the poll to be open, please.
Great, thanks.
Minute, if you could get your responses in, it would be good to see if you're aware of South Africa's context and, of course, performance in the past 10 years. All right, we're about to close. That's great. Everyone is paying attention. Tony, it's an engaged audience. The right answer is 62 to 70, and I'll hand over to you to talk about the South Africa context.
Great, thank you, Pratima, and good afternoon, everybody. Happy to share the South African environment, which will lead into the discussions with the panel a little bit later. So first of all, I would say just maybe the DG of Agriculture, Mr. Ramasodi. First of all, congratulations with your appointment, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. Also with Jaco Minnaar, Jaco being recently appointed as the President of Gfsi. Jaco, looking forward to work with you. And then all the USDA diplomatic staff here this afternoon. Happy to partner with you guys. A lot of new faces, but looking forward to meet all of you as well. So as Pratima indicated, if you look at South Africa, and your question is right, we moved from to the 70th position, and you can see where we're ranking in Sub-Saharan Africa out of 28 countries. So we obviously the highest in Sub-Saharan Africa, unfortunately not the highest in Africa yet, but that would be certainly an aspiration for us. At the end, as Pratima indicated, Burundi is the lowest there, and right in the middle, we find Uganda as well. So certainly doing really well. We topped the quality and safety category, and we're ranking second in affordability in Sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you. Let's go to the next slide. So interestingly, if you the trend looking from 2012, we started off with a 55 score, and 2016 up to 63.4. And you can see to it since 2018 dropping down to 57.8. Now, certainly, I think overall from 2012, we up just still 2 points, but the trend in the last 3 years was downward. So it's important, obviously, factors that play into that was the pandemic that we experienced worldwide, but in Africa as well as South Africa. So let's look at a bit more detail. Where did this come from? So in terms of the 4 pillars that was introduced by Pratima, in terms of affordability, we dropped from 66 to 63, availability from 50 to 49. And you can see the 2 areas where we're really performing nicely in South Africa is quality and safety, and then natural resources and resilience. A nice increase from 36 to 49. So I think within these areas, as this is a data-driven model, we need to look at where are the areas where we can improve and where do we need to focus to make the most impact in terms of food security in South Africa. Thank you. Now, this is a busy slide, and my intention is not to talk about all of these, but let me start off. There's 2 things that I'm going to talk about. First of all, trends. When there's a drop in terms of an area, I'll touch on that quickly. But secondly, you can see the different colors on the screen. So let me start with the bottom part. A score between 0 and 19 indicates red. So I'll be talking a little bit about those red categories that you have there. And then the dark greens is between 80 and 100. And the yellow is between 40 and 59. So let me start overall. So we've got an average score of 57.8. And over the period, we increased about 2 points. But as I indicated, I think what we need to focus on is what happened in the past, the last 3 years overall in South Africa. So first of all, affordability, you'll see it's green. We've got a 63.1 score there. If I look at the movements there, you can see the orange one, which is adjusted income index. And as we know, our society in South Africa, especially the pandemic in terms of what we have, the gaps between haves and have-nots in South Africa. So we dropped there about 11 from 42 to 31. So that would be an area that I think we need to look at and see how we can work on that specifically, obviously wider than only agriculture, but a key area for us. If you go down a little bit in terms of food safety net, and you can see that although we're green, we've got a nice positive score of 75. Over the period, we dropped 25 points there. That specific area looks at the presence, funding, as well as the coverage of the food safety net. And in those 3 areas, we dropped quite aggressively over the last 3 to 4 years. And obviously, the pandemic would certainly play into that as well. So I think that is the 2 areas that I want to highlight for us to look at in terms of the affordability leg. Secondly, availability. I would say average score at 49.4. There are 3 areas that I want to talk about here, and I think everybody would be interested in agricultural research and development. And if you look at the worldwide scores, that even in developed countries trended downwards in the last 3 years. For us, and if you look at that definition in terms of that area, it is public as well as private investment in terms of R&D. Now, obviously, I think we all need to take hands here as the private sector, and I think as Subarao indicated, we're certainly aggressively investing in R&D in South Africa, and we need to work with government and see how do we take hands to improve that score as well, because productivity equals technology that we bring into South Africa. The 2 red areas that we have here is the volatility and ag production. And if you look at the FAO, obviously South Africa is defined as a climate-sensitive country. We've been really blessed in terms of the last 2 seasons having good rains, but over the longer term, our score is 0 there. So that is something that we need to look at that and how do we mitigate and manage that moving forward. And at the bottom, you would see food security policy. There are 2 areas there. We got a score of 0 there as well. It is having a strategy and policy, but secondly, also having an agency working on food security. And all of those, both those areas, we didn't score anything. So that would be an area for us to focus on, taking hands with everybody in the industry as well as government on that. Now, the 2 positive areas where we did well and increased our score is quality and safety. You can see we've got a nice green score of 72, and we increased our score with about 7.4%. Now, if you look at the first green one, which increased with 50 points, which is really good from a benchmarking point of view, is nutritional standards. And we scored nicely on guidelines, labeling, as well as monitoring on that area. And then the dark green one at the bottom in terms of food safety, with a score of 92.7, certainly meeting up with the best in the world in terms of that. And then the last leg, which is also the new area that was added in the last 2 years, is natural resources and resilience. We've got an average score of 49. We increase about with 13.1 points. But I think this is critical from a sustainability point of view. If you want to think about how do you influence this overall score over the next 10 years, you need to focus on this leg in terms of natural resources and resilience. Now, the ones that I want to focus on is water, and that's water risk for agriculture. And the dimension that it's measured in is quantity and quality. And I think if you look at our score of 10, that's really low and a focus area for us in terms of that. The second one is ocean, rivers, and lakes. We've got a score of 13, which is really low in terms of the benchmarking. That would be a critical area for us, specifically looking at where South Africa is in terms of infrastructure and be able to manage water and what get into our rivers. Because if the quality of the water goes down, it severely impacts agriculture in South Africa. So those in short that I want to highlight. Happy to take more questions later on the panel this afternoon. I think can you go to the next slide, please? I think we've got another question here. Which of the 4 categories of the 2021 index do you see as being the most urgent for our country in addressing our food security? Let's run the poll. Interesting answers that we're getting here. Certainly, all of them are important. I think there may be personal views about this, but I think for sustainability, I would agree with the audience in terms of longer term, in terms looking at what you need today to be able to produce for tomorrow. So thank you for that. Let's move to the next slide. Yeah, that's it. So thanks a lot for listening to Pratima and myself, and also participating in the polls, and happy to participate further in the panel discussion this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Pratima, are you still online? So I just want to remind you to please stay online for the panel discussion, which will start in about 10 minutes. Thanks. So we're going to have a very quick break. I think it's about 5 to 4 now, so if everyone can be seated again at about 4 o'clock, then we'll go into the panel discussion, and you will have a chance to pose questions to Pratima and to Tony and also to the other panel members. And then we will aim to wrap things up by around 5 o'clock, so that you've got plenty of time to enjoy each other's company after we finish the session. Thanks. everyone, please will you take your seats? We're about to start with a panel discussion. Okay, welcome back everyone to the panel session. As I said, we are going to try and aim to conclude this by about 5 o'clock. With this discussion, we hope to provide a value chain perspective on food security and to stimulate some critical thinking around the 4 key pillars, which is affordability, availability, quality and safety, and then lastly, natural resources and resilience. Our first panel member, and as I announced them, they can please make their way up to the stage and take a seat, is Ayanda Kanana, the CEO of Land Bank. Ayanda is also a farmer and a qualified chartered accountant. He was previously the CEO of the Johannesburg Fresh Produce Market, and he won the Public Sector CEO of the Year Award in 2019. That was presented by the Association for the Advancement of Black Accountants in Southern Africa. Welcome, Ayanda. You get to choose your first. The closer you sit to me, the more questions you're going to get.
I know, you will see.
Next, we've got Sinelizwe Fakada. I'm the Managing Director of Rocky Park Farming. Sinelizwe is a commercial grain farmer and in the Eastern Cape. He's also the founder and the chairman of the Unequal Farmer Development NPO, which mentors, trains, and upskills developing farmers in the Eastern Cape. He's a member of the Department of Agriculture's task team, focusing on agricultural production and investment post-COVID-19. Welcome, and you can join us in Elizwe. And then I welcome back to the stage Ali Abdi, the U.S. Minister Counselor for Agricultural Affairs at the U.S. Department of Agriculture. He has served in foreign agricultural services for the United States Department of Agriculture since about 1994. Prior to his assignment to South Africa as Minister Counselor, he served in Egypt, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Saudi Arabia. Welcome, Ali. And then our next member of the panel is Yanser Robbie. He is the head of natural resources at AgriSA. He's a seasoned attorney who, prior to joining AgriSA in 2017, practiced as a specialist environmental lawyer in private and government sectors, both in South Africa and abroad, for more than 50 years. You're welcome to join us, Yanser. Then we have Robert Kraft, who's the director of Kraft Fruit. He has an honors degree in economics from the University of Stellenbosch. In 2007, he was the AgriSA and Toyota Young Farmer of the Year. Based in Ceres, Kraft Fruit is a third-generation family business, known for their top quality standards, and the business produces some of the best deciduous fruit, including peaches, nectarines, apricot, cherries, and plums in South Africa. Kraft Fruit aims to grow the best quality fruit in harmony with nature. Welcome, Robert. We also have Kobus Pinaarje, the Technical Manager for Food Security at Woolworth, South Africa. Kobus grew up on a farm and studied agriculture and qualified as a soil scientist in 1989 at the University of the Free State. In 2004, he joined the Woolworths produce team as a food technologist. He later also obtained a postgraduate diploma in sustainable development from Stellenbosch University, and that was in 2012. And currently he is responsible to look at ways to ensure Woolworths contributes to sustainable food systems in South Africa. And then also joining us back on stage is Tony Esmeralda, the business leader for Southern Africa with Corteva Agri-Sciences. Esmeralda leads the Southern African Commercial Organization, which includes South Africa, Namibia, Swaziland, Lesotho, and Botswana. And he's accountable for growth and profitability of the Corteva Crop Protection, Pioneer, and Panos Seeds businesses. Welcome again, Tony. And then, of course, we've got joining us virtually, we've got Pratima Singh, the Senior Manager for Policy and Insights with the Economist Intelligence Unit. Welcome back, Pratima. So I'm going to start with you, Pratima, because we are in South Africa, and I'm always afraid that we're going to lose electricity at any moment. So, so while we definitely still have you, so I want to start with some of the comments you made, and for example, that those countries that have managed to improve their position on the index have invested and done some very specific things. For example, you mentioned the importance of investing in research and development. And I want to get some idea of exactly what type of research and what type of developments and in what type of things does that investment need to happen?
Sure. So I think there are a couple of different learnings that we've seen over the index in terms of countries that have made big improvements or lack thereof. And of course, one of the things that we flagged is in the availability category, something that Tony also mentioned, is that we have a specific indicator that looks at basically agricultural resources and of course technical investments, agricultural research and development. So that can be sort of split into two, where we look at public investment in ag R&D, and that in fact looks at the proxy that we use there is the Agricultural Orientation Index, which is something the UN has also created, which basically looks at how much investment is coming from, public investment is going into agriculture as a share of agriculture GDP value add, really. So essentially what we're seeing is that if there's more investment than the sector contributes, that leads to a higher AOI, or Agricultural Orientation Index. And then, of course, we also see the other side, which is the private sector investment. So whether it's things like access to technology and, of course, other bits there. So what we've seen is that, so basically total factor productivity in terms of agricultural investment. So that's what the index is measured. Now, of course, in our research, we've also delved a little bit more into what types of investments are happening on the ground and what that really looks like in terms of translated, into output. So of course, one of the things that we've seen and mentioned before is that we're trying to do more with less, and that we're seeing a lot of, focus on more with less, but also do more better. And so whether it's countries investing in effective techniques around, basically higher yield productivity through, more precision agriculture, using water resources more sustainably in order to, drive outcomes in terms of more from like a small acre of land, or also things like vertical farming. Essentially, wherever we're seeing, we've made notes of this in our research, not so much necessarily in the index, because that's very data driven, but more from a qualitative perspective, where we're seeing things that are more technology driven investments in engaging, of course, different stakeholders and coming together to solve some of those agricultural issues. That's sort of what we're highlighting as some of the best practices globally in terms of investment and, of course, innovation in ag R&D that helps solve availability, but just generally the, the link and the connection between the fourth category of natural resources along with availability in order to solve the global food security crisis.
Well, thanks, Pratima. And then I've got one more question for you that's more about the methodology used in compiling the index. And this is from just a thought piece that Wandile Shlobo, the chief economist at AgBiz, released today, where he says that the subjectivity cannot be eliminated from the author's judgment when compiling the index. And he also refers to what impact resource constraints can have in terms of hindering the objectivity of the data that you publish, and also the ability to collect that data at ground level. So is this a factor, and how does it influence the outcomes of the index?
Yeah. So, of course, we're measuring 113 countries. So there are nuances what we're trying to do is create a framework and a benchmarking tool that allows us to compare the drivers of food security rather than the outcomes across the 113 countries. And so that framework needs to be powerful enough, but also consistent across these countries so that we can measure what's going on. We're measuring apples to apples rather than apples to oranges. So there is, of course, with any exercise that's this large, where we're collecting 58 indicators and sub-indicators for 113 countries across 10 years, we have to be rigorous because we are doing this. Well, we've done this for 10 years now, but we're doing this every year and kind of strengthening this every year. So our team is collecting all of this information for these countries. So we've obviously got regional teams that are looking at collecting it for their different regions. And then we sort of assess this and do it bottom up in that sense, in terms of collecting that information. But then, of course, yes, there are things, I'm sure there will always be factors around context that cannot necessarily be eliminated, things around exposure and all of that. But what we're trying to do with this index is not necessarily measure the context that's, provided, or the almost the hand that's been sort of dealt. More also the fact that what is being done about it. Are there policies, are there factors that are in place to either mitigate some of the risk if there are countries that have high risk in certain aspects, in order to assess that whole action element versus just this is what the situation is, and so this is the risk or this is the exposure. So that's sort of the angle that we approach this with, and we're trying our best to make sure that it's a consistent benchmarking framework across the 113 countries in order to assess the global environment.
Thank you, Pratima. I'm going to come over to you, Tony, as we continue to reflect on the presentations that you made. And you did end off with that very busy slide that gave some more insight into how South Africa scored in the different matrices. So maybe to summarize and to maybe add a practical aspect to what you presented, which levers do you think should we focus on in South Africa in the next 5 to 10 years to really improve that score, and not just the score, but also the reality of food security in South Africa?
Great, thank you. So I would probably look at 4 areas. So under the leg of affordability, and I think what Pratima mentioned is investment in R&D in ag in South Africa. And if you look at that specific area, it looks at public investment as well as private investment. So I think we need to take hands in terms of that, because technology makes farmers competitive, and they can compete on the world forum in terms of that. Secondly, I think the issue about food security policy, where we really got zero, and there's 2 categories there. The one is having a policy that are consulted widely and agreed on, and having an agency that focuses on food security and what are the real things we need to do in South Africa. And I think the sustainability one, in terms of looking at the risk around water in South Africa, the quality and the quantity that's available for food production. I would say those, my personal opinion, those are the key issues that we need to focus on.
Thanks, Tony. I just want to come back to one point that you mentioned there, and Pratima, that was also very much part of your presentation. And in those countries that have seen, in the low-income countries that have seen an increase in their food security scores in the index, one of the things that was mentioned that was food was made more affordable. And so my question there is, certainly this is something that we need to address in South Africa, is the affordability aspect. But how do we go about, and maybe if we can learn from those countries, how do you make food more affordable without taking income away from the farmer who's already operating in a very low margin environment?
Yeah, so that's a really great question and something that we've been sort of tracking very closely since the start of the pandemic, and even beyond before that, quite frankly. The thing is that what we're looking at in the index is, because this is under the affordability category, we're looking at the cost of the food inflation or the cost to consumer for food, right? Now, of course, this goes through, there's a whole supply chain that obviously you're aware of as well. But what we found last year and even this year is that, to your point, a lot of that increase in food prices that the end consumer is paying is not actually going into the pocket of the farmers, right? A lot of that, the farmers, the smallholders in particular, but generally farmers at the ground level, don't necessarily reap the benefits of higher food prices. There are a lot of inefficiencies in the system, in the supply chain, particularly around, not enough investment in ag infrastructure, for instance, higher transport costs, all of those things that need to be addressed so that the inefficiencies that the end consumer is paying for can be mitigated. And also, if there are, in fact, increases in food costs, some of that will in fact then come down to the farmer level, because right now we're seeing farmers or the producers not actually getting any of that increase, while the consumers at the other end of the spectrum are paying that higher cost. So we need to address the system, the supply chain inefficiencies in order for us to not have to deal with that going forward. So I hope that answers your question.
Thanks very much for that. So I'm going to move over to the rest of the panel. And Ayanda, as I said, since you chose the hottest seat, I'm going to start with you. And I think this follows on quite well from some of the comments that Pratima has made now. And it's a very straightforward and easy question with a very complex and difficult answer, I would imagine. How do we finance food security in a volatile economic situation as we have in South Africa?
I think the answer is in the panel and the audience as well. So I'm not sure if you can hear me. Thank you. I think the answer doesn't just simply lie in front. I think the audience has got some views. But if you look at the financing, it's probably one of the aspects or pillars, but it doesn't start there. You talk about the cost of food, and that discussion exists at a macro level, where there are quite dynamics there. Prices are set at different levels. Farmers are price takers. And it all comes down. There's a formal and an informal. Hello. There's a formal and an informal sector. My experience at the market will tell you that there's quite a big informal sector. And you have to help the farmer get to the point of sale. You have to help the farmer get to package the food properly. You have to get the farmer to either export their product. So there's quite a lot of dynamics in that particular space. And there's a cost to that. Mm-hmm. There is a cost of financing the farmer. But the farmer must have a resource. If they've got land and they own it, probably a bit cheaper. If they've got to buy the land, a little bit more expensive. South Africa tends to use products that are imported. There's a cost to that. So by the time we have to come and fund a particular program or a particular farmer, there's a lot of dynamics that have played themselves out such that, one, they have to take the price, and maybe we can't go beyond or below a particular cost because it doesn't become sustainable for us as well. And then we have to get to that particular number as to what the farmer is going to sell all of this for. So as you're trying to define how to fund the farmer, you have to consider all the variables that exist around them at a macro and a micro level. Who's going to buy the product? So it's a very difficult question you've asked. But I think also it's a partnership between the government and the private sector. at least the model we are following now, and I think the DG who's here with us can understand some of my frustration, at least in trying to blend these loans as well as the grants, so that you lower the cost, you lower the fence for the farmer to be able to come in. So some of the solutions are not overly scientific, but it's important where the silver lining is. I always tell the DG, I'm not a grant person, but farming is a business. Is the business able to return the necessary amounts of money such that we can get the money back and be able to fund the next person? If we are unable to do so and we are just pumping money out, the cost of this astronomically builds every year. It doesn't get to go down. So we don't need more of consumables or consumer money. We need money that does actually come back. If we're funding too much consumables, you end up with a situation where every year the cost escalates. Every year the person comes back, but the returns don't come back. And that's the challenge with working out the cost of funding, and then the model that you must use to deliver that particular funding program. I hope it makes sense. It's quite a complicated set of scenarios to work out how much it costs and what vehicle you must employ. Thanks.
So you're not quite done yet. So over and above funding directly to farmers, within the rest of the value chain and supply chain, where else do you think are there funding gaps in terms of the food value chain?
Maybe let's start where the problem is at times. There's too many of us trying to do the same thing. I could identify a gap as the lender in Land Bank. A municipality or a province has a funding program. They've also identified a funding gap. The Ministry of Small Business identified a funding gap, and some of the farmers are queuing there. There are commercial banks who also have identified a gap. They are filling a particular. Now, where it comes to us, or where it pertains to us, we are saying we are filling a gap where the commercial banks don't want to fund you. Who else will then look at you? Who else will take that risk? So again, it depends on who the lender is. We are the lender of last resort, at least in my area. But the risk we take to be the lender of last resort means some of the money might never come back. So you have to mix the opportunity there with the gap and make sure that you remain sustainable. So depending on which lender you are, there are just a number of gaps that you are trying to fill. Some are looking at a profit opportunity. Some are looking at socio-economic factors they're trying to address. And you will find that we are either a debt-driven institution, or we are a blended institution, or, yeah, it just depends on which opportunity you are identifying where. There are quite a number of them. And then the people who must then come and talk to you also get confused, because you may find that you are queuing in the wrong place because there's so many opportunities available for funding. You're also just needing to be helped. So you go to the Small Business Ministry to look for assistance. You've got the NEF, you've got the Land Bank, you've got the commercial banks, you've got everybody who has identified a particular gap. So it becomes really confusing to the user. And I think what we must do is really narrow or stitch ourselves a little bit better. And I think the department is doing that now with a new blended finance opportunity, where they're opening it up a little bit wider so that the reach is far better. But we also must narrow the information. There's just too much information and people go everywhere. So the gaps never really get closed. Instead, one person moves from the next office to the next. And if you know how to fund a farmer, you're funding a commercial season. If you miss it, you've destroyed that farmer.
Yeah.
And it's quite important to get it right. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, so let's hear from the farmers. Sinelizwe, I'm going to start with you, and then I'm also going to bring this question to you, Robert. What do we need to change in primary agriculture to improve food security?
Thanks, Deneen. I don't know if audible. Can I have that? I think first of all, I mean, as someone who's fairly young in the industry, started farming in 2019, the major thing for me I'll talk from an Eastern Cape perspective, where you've got a very big balance of farmers that are developing. You've got a very big balance of farmers who are in a position of just making sure that their food's secure. And it's a situation of trying to unlock that potential with regards to relaxed funding, with regards to various strategies to subsidize that particular approach. I think, with the type of work we're doing in the Eastern Cape as someone involved in development, the aim is not to give out or create a platform or model that is a handout base. You've got the department in the province as well who've approached a commercial approach. So I think a lot of the areas for me is just to get them over the line in terms of subsidize the cost. From a bag of fertilizer that's gone up to 700 Rand a bag, someone who had budgeted 400 Rand, who's covering that particular increase? And I think some of those ways, or should I say, two of those ways being obviously subsidy funding, continuous support with regards to mentoring and getting the actual people producing commercial yields on their hectares wherever they are. Those are the ways where, in my opinion, you can increase ways of getting a higher food security, particularly from guys that aren't in a position of being able to afford having a lot of access. As long as they can produce their own, puts them in a position of being more food secure, in my opinion. Thanks.
Sorry, before I come to you to answer that question, Robert, I just want to get some feedback from you since you're on the stage. So how would you, so you're dealing with this practically every day, and you're talking about a subsidy for inputs, for example. How would you like to receive that subsidy?
Well, currently with the farmers, the model that we've done in the province, in partnership with various partners, private sector, FarmSol, John Deere, Department of Agriculture, and the like, what we've tried to do is the farmer puts skin in the game, and it's normally a situation where you get, lower rates in terms of relaxed funding, in terms of lower interest rates. But in this particular position, because we're developing farmers and the type of work of improving food security at household level, that type of finance can come in terms of, as I say, relaxed financing, drop the interest rate, maybe interest holidays as well, are some of the areas where I think you'll position farmers to actually get the leap of commercializing and being food secure for themselves before obviously you're in a position of promoting them to a commercial bank or a land bank or someone who's got more tougher conditions of financing, in my opinion. So I think as long as you just keep that wheel turning, we're in a position of getting a position of food security at a lower level, in particular at household.
Okay, thank you. And then Robert, what do you think needs to change in primary agriculture, if anything, to better address food security?
Well, I can only talk for the fruit industry because that's my small area of expertise, which is a luxury. Fruit is regarded as a luxury item. The economy needs to grow. We need jobs to be created, and that creates demand. And then people will start buying healthier food and looking after their health. So the whole economy needs a kickstart. And then we'll see demand go up, and then we'll be able to sell more fruit, and hopefully people will have a healthier and more sustainable diet. We've also seen and I'm not a protagonist of lifting the minimum wage, but when the minimum wage has gone up, consumption has also gone up. And we've found that people are actually eating healthier, looking after their diets. So, and there are many schemes where government can get involved, like food feeding schemes for schools. That's a huge driver. Putting, fruit on the table at schools encourages healthy living, healthy children, and I think it's a very small input for government to make, encouraging those types of programs.
Thanks. Robert, I'm going to stay with you for a moment because I want to talk a bit now about how the COVID-19 pandemic impacted food security and also in South Africa how it impacted the food value chain. So in your business, what impacts did you see on export and sort of more wider, how does that impact food security?
Fortunately, we saw increased demand for healthy food products like fruit. But it also is driven by supply and demand. And if there's an excess of table grapes or citrus in the market, the prices will come down. Unfortunately, we're very reliant on the exchange rate. So that makes a huge difference on profitability. And no one can influence the rand-dollar exchange rate or the rand-pound for that matter. But we have seen a healthy uptake that people are looking after their health in terms of they know that oranges is good for vitamin C. They know that apples are good to fill your stomach. So we've seen demand. Our biggest challenge has been with COVID is the, how can I say, the meltdown in the world shipping infrastructure, where it's incredibly difficult to get fruit to particular countries. You know, we've waited up to 66 days for a ship to arrive from Cape Town in Bangladesh. And fresh fruit can't handle that length of time on the water or in a fridge. So we really need to focus on our ports and to making them more efficient. I just heard or read the other day that Chile has got a 40-year plan for their ports to increase their competitiveness for global fruit exports. And that's the timeline that the people are talking about. We need to come up with the same kind of plans, because overnight you're not going to fix the problem. But if you've got a long-term plan in place, I think you can make a huge difference.
Thanks. Cobus, and then the same question to you. So at Woolworths and sort of more generally in supply chains, in terms of food availability, how did you see COVID-19 impact the food system? And do you think there's any any latent weaknesses that were highlighted by the pandemic and also by the riots that happened in July?
Yeah, it was an interesting time when we went into lockdown. Like Robert says here, that your infrastructure and your transport systems were totally disrupted. We had to move products from places we never thought we would in the first place. So, but we learned a lot, and thanks heavens for technology that could help us with that challenges that we faced. But purchasing from consumers was extremely good. We had with the pandemic a very good season in selling food. But like Robert says, it was the healthy foods. Those nice chocolates that we have on the shelf, they took a beating. Unfortunately, with the wine, we also took a beating in that category because they were not changed. Yeah, we all had an issue with that one. But your basic good quality healthy food sold extremely well. We had some very good numbers in that. So yeah, it's difficult to preempt what is going to be the reaction of the consumer during a lockdown. But we learned a lot. One thing that we learned is speed, specifically in the area where we had to improve our systems in when I order offline. That was not going into stores. That was something we overloaded our system at one stage and couldn't operate. So yeah, it's speed to the market and make sure that you understand what is in the customer's head. Be closer to them than normal.
Have you seen those increased demand for fresh produce and healthier products? Has that been sustained, or has people reverted to their old ways already?
No, it's definitely higher than it was before. Our healthier ranges is doing well. Even in our sweets departments, they had to adapt. Less sugar and less colorants, etc. in that. And even those categories is doing better. So people have definitely stayed with their healthy habits.
Okay. So I just want to come back to you, Tony, and to Pratima. And so in terms of the South African score in the 2021 index, how much of that, the level to which we've fallen, how much of that do you think has got to do with COVID-19 and supply chain shocks?
So let me go first. So I think if you look at affordability, certainly I think in terms of the safety net, the score really went down, and I think that it's got a direct relation with what happened with COVID. And I think certainly the availability of certain stuff were disrupted by the supply chain could impact that as well. So I think those two specific areas certainly were impacted by COVID.
So do you think we can expect a strong bounce back on those industries?
Yeah, I think unfortunately the supply chains worldwide is disrupted to such an extent, it's probably going to stay with us for the next 12 to 18 months. So I think it'll take a while before you get back to normal, especially when you import stuff from other continents. I think that's going to be impacting us on the medium term.
Okay, thanks. Ali, I want to get to you, and we're coming back to money. And so I think Ayanda very succinctly outlined the need that there is for financing in South African agriculture. So I want you to talk about how do we get that money? How can South Africa attract foreign investment for programs that would directly benefit food security?
Sure. Well, thank you. Very good question. I think the good news is, just so I get the question right, I want to make sure I understand it. So this is regarding attracting foreign investment?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, very good. So as I was saying, the good news is that, South African agriculture has already plenty of advantages. Plenty, I would say. And is a leader, actually, in this field, as we all know. So many international businesses maintain presence in South Africa. That's a fact. Those operations are often hubs for other markets even. It's not just for South Africa. So, here, in terms of maintaining and expanding investment, I think this requires, a number of different elements. Predictable rules and regulations, very important. Facilitation, absolutely. Business-friendly environment, good infrastructure. We've all heard, just now, both soft and hard in terms of infrastructure. That's absolutely necessary. So I think all of these, among others, so these are all important factors where it's not any different from any other investment, where you have to have the platform on the climate and the area to the space to actually attract that investment, as opposed to that investment going somewhere else.
Thank you. Yanser, you have been as patient as a forest, which I'm sure is in your nature. So now we're going to talk about, I think, what has been highlighted in Pratima and Tony's presentations, as well as going forward, what is perhaps going to emerge as the most important pillar of food security, and that is to look at our natural resource sustainability. So just to start, if we can quickly recap, and if you can reflect for us on COP26, 26, I want to say 2016, I'm doing a Zoom as well, COP26. So what are some of the outcomes and commitments emanating from this that will really aid ensuring food security in a sustainable way?
Deneen, yes, I think COP26 was very much an energy COP. I think more than the food security issues, although that was directly linked to it. And I think one mustn't discount the fact that energy consumption is directly related to food production as well. So COP26 was really one about moving away from fossil fuels, particularly coal in South Africa. And I think we were very fortunate in South Africa to have a very well-prepared team going into COP26 and the negotiations. And even before the event actually started, being able to announce this deal with the European Union, Germany, UK, United States, on securing funding to the tune of 131 billion South African rands for the next financial year, I hope, to be able to move away from fossil-based energy. We need to place that into perspective. The commitment in terms of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement that followed from that is that the developed world actually committed to contributing $100 billion per year as from 2020. So we're falling well short of that, and that's probably the one thing that I think, although we had a wonderful result, I think coming from the negotiations in South Africa being the only one that really got to do that, it is something that needs to be followed up on. It's moving away from our finite resources and our fossil fuels in particular, and that goes to efficiency as well. It's not only about renewable energy and the things that are related to that, it's also very much to making sure that we're as efficient as possible, that we look after our resources as well as we can, and we make sure that we enter into a sustainable future, which is really all about our children after them.
And Yanser, so one of our red blocks on Tony's slide was water. And I think this is becoming a household issue as much as electricity has been in South Africa for so long, where we're seeing increasing water blackouts as well. But it's long been a problem. So if we look at the poor levels of household food security and also water security that we have in South Africa, is South Africa producing the right basket of agricultural produce to be cognizant of this very severe scarcity that we have when it comes to water?
It's a complex question. I think Mr. Ramasori said it in the beginning also. We're sometimes importing what we need and exporting what we don't need, or other way around. But there's certainly an argument to be made for the fact that we might have to focus and shift our priorities as far as what we're producing in South Africa to be able to ensure that at least domestically we're able to remain food secure. There's a lot of room for improvement, but a person also needs to bear in mind that farmers, and now I come from the production side of things with Agri-SA, is farmers really do what is available to them with the resources at hand. So it's fine to be able to think of producing commodities that are sometimes luxuries, but sometimes the water and other natural resources are simply not available to be able to do so. So bear that in mind, I think, for the farmer's sake at least. But I think there's certainly, and we're going to see it more and more in the future, that we're going to have to prioritize those commodities that we need to be able to feed our population effectively, and to take into account our climatic and other, particularly water resources, to be able to farm optimally. And it really is about this question of optimization and making sure that we're more efficient in what we produce, how we produce it, and how we look to the future for that.
Thanks, Yanser. I've got a lot of questions here, but I do want to give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions before I get back to some of my own, if there is anybody right now. Yanni de Villiers from Grain SA, you are welcome to pose your question.
I'm not from Grain SA any longer. I'm now
retired,
man. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Just the relevancy of that. We're busy with a master plan, putting in some targets. So my question, and maybe it's more to Pratima or Tony, who's got the details. If we currently number 70, where do we want to be as a country by 2030? Because we need to put these sort of targets on the wall to say, what is it possible for us so that we can start talking as leaders together and say, what can we change? That's the first thing. The second thing is, you ask about affordability. Now, in my days of economics, you have to up the supply to bring down the prices if you've got a free market. And to increase our supply, the constraint today in agriculture is the financing of our new farmers. So we must stop talking about this thing and get this right. Otherwise, we won't be able to up the supply, help with the growth of the sector. And that. So those are just two remarks. But the one is the question that I would like to hear. What would be a realistic target? Because tomorrow, we're going to have to put it for Mr. Ramasori in a piece of paper and say, this is where we want to be in 2030. So I would like to hear what is realistic.
Okay. Tony, are you happy to respond to a realistic target?
I certainly can. It's tough to put a number out there, but because there's a range, I'll try, Yanni. So if you talk about availability, we're already green. We've got, I think, 69 there. If you talk about affordability, we're in the yellow category between 50 and 59. I would say we need to turn that green and get that in the 69, 70 range. Then if you talk about quality and safety, we're world class in terms of our scoring that we got in terms of that. Green, so, and then in natural resources, we've got a 59, it's yellow. I think we need to turn that green. If you do all of that and you look at the weighting between the 4 areas, you'll probably end with an average score around 70. And that'll probably put you in the top third in the world in terms of our rankings. But just a final comment on that. I think by just looking at our data that goes into our scoring, it's going to help us already. Because a lot of the data, and I've got a list of all of that, are 10, 15 years old that are put into the system. So from a Corteva point of view, we're sponsoring master students at the moment that are looking at that. I've spoken to Ferdi. We need to work and see how do we get the data right and say, is that the real number that we're working on? Thank you.
Pratima, can you also weigh in on the question, please?
Absolutely. I think it down is excellent in that just sort of putting in targets for the individual categories is going to be critical, because what we've seen work is rather than saying, okay, of course we need to know where we're going, but what does it take to get there? And so focusing on improving availability, focusing on improving natural resources and resilience is really the way to get there. And of course, even if it's not in the top 30, if we start with in the top 50 and then work our way forward from there, I think that's already a lot of progress for the next 5 years even. And so I think looking at specific categories and then focusing from there is going to be critical. And I want to echo Tony's point. A lot of times what we do here is that the data is old sometimes and not necessarily reported accurately. So just making sure that the quality of the data is in fact updated and rigorous and strong in order to be able to really assess what's happening on the ground can be really helpful. So making sure that the data is collected, it's reported and communicated, and of course that allows us to really sort of improve, because quite frankly, we cannot improve, we cannot manage what we can't measure. And so measuring it is going to be important as well.
Thanks. Any more questions from the floor at this point? Yes.
Thanks. Thank you. It's Maluta from Nedbank here. I just want to find out, how do you factor in the unemployment rate into this index? I mean, given the high unemployment rate of 34% in the country and over 70% for youth. Thank you.
Yes,
I'm going to come to you with that to answer that question, Ayana, and I think it comes back to the issue of affordability. It's sort of a well-known fact, and Mr. Ramaswamy also alluded to this, that we do produce enough food in South Africa to feed everyone. And the problem isn't necessarily agriculture. We are very efficient at growing food, but we are much less efficient at putting people in a position to be able to access and afford that food. So where do we start turning this around? Where do we start creating more jobs? And is there other solutions? Do we need to look at a bigger social safety net? Do we need to increase the grants given to people so that we can really see a difference at household level?
Thanks. Thank you so much. So you will have heard at the beginning that the issue we have is that at a national level we can produce food. But when you bring it down to the household level, that's where you have your problems. South Africa is rated as one of the most unequal countries in the world. Why? And I don't want to, I'm not a politician, so I won't go there. But the issue we have is there are small to medium-sized producers who are not able to enter the system. Because we are producing so much that even the informal sector benefits from the formal sector, where do we place the small to medium-sized producer who is able to then create the jobs? Now, they have a number of limitations. you find that they don't have sufficient collateral to participate. You find that the credit rating is not where it should be. You find the experience of the farmer is not at the right level. Access to market and packaging and marketing that product is not where it should be. The quality and safety, the food handling, cold chain management, all those issues play a role for that particular sector of farmers. Now, it is the responsibility of government to provide that pre- and post-finance support. Private sector is not going to touch it without an expectation of particular returns. So it is placed firmly on government to identify these issues, sort them out. If we don't, you will still expect, at least we have about what, over 800,000 jobs created in the agri-sector today? But there could be more. And there's probably more that are not accounted for within that small to medium-sized sector, which has got a lot of limitations. And it will then answer the issue of unemployment. How then do we deal with it? If we sort out these issues, which on their own are a topic, you will then start clawing back on the unemployment issue. But again, government doesn't have all the resources to deal with each and every one of these. So those who have the window of opportunity to come in and are supported have a real responsibility on their shoulders to try and reduce the unemployment rate in the country. Thanks.
Thanks. So, Cobus, I think you would be also the appropriate person to come in at this point and to follow up on that. How do we go about designing procurement and distribution models that really effectively enable the participation of smaller farmers, small-scale farmers, and medium-sized enterprises?
Yeah, that is, for us, that is a value chain question. So you need to include all the role players in that. It's very difficult for a retailer to teach somebody how to farm. We have the expertise in how to market the product, so we can play a role in the marketing of it. We barely know anything about farm financing, so maybe the finance institutions can come in there to help us. So there need to be more collaboration throughout the chain to make sure how those small-scale farmers can come into the picture. For us is that also the commercial farmer can play a role there. One of the biggest issues we have, we've got a number of projects going, is that the whole issue around overheads. If by the time a small-scale farmer complies to our food safety standards, he's bankrupt. Because you need a bit of scale. Yeah. So, commercial farmers as well. So it's a matter of getting all the role players in from universities, the government. Our colleague here alluded to collateral. For a small-scale farmer who don't own any land, to get a loan is impossible. So right from the onset, he's on the back foot. So there need to be a real rethinking about the whole value chain and the importance that small-scale farmers can play, and they can play an extremely important role in making food more accessible to people. But it's going to be a collaborative effort from everybody in the whole value chain that can play a role there.
Thanks. Sinalizwe, so to come to you with what Cobus has just said, so do you think that farmers are aware of this social responsibility role that they have, and that's really embedded in the type of businesses that they run?
Yeah, I would agree, Deneen. I mean, I think it's very hard to find a farmer that is not really aware of their surroundings, commercial or otherwise. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that, as a farmer myself who's walked into the industry, fairly young in the business, what I've managed to understand is that it's important, to have those relationships with more established farmers, because you learn a lot more, from them. That's the first thing. The second thing is that, ultimately, because of the environments where we work in, where our businesses are associated and located, we're surrounded by community. So I think from a social responsibility perspective, the farmers are aware of what it takes and what will it take to make sure that it's a cohesive and a collective effort to change the picture, or the current picture at least, with regards to, as Mr. Ayanda alluded to, the inequalities. So I think there is work being done by the industry, no doubt. There's work being done by the government, no doubt. But I think it's always important for me as a lesson to support the right jockeys to drive the change. You know, a lot of these systems where money's being pumped into 100 different channels, but not even one is giving you positive results. Support the right jockey to drive the change, and in that way you will achieve a better picture than we have in this country. Thanks.
Hold the applause until he clarifies. Who's the right jockey to back?
Well, again, I'll just talk by myself. You know, I don't know a lot. I know farmers who are doing better than me, more than me, as young as they are. So I'm not going to sit here and say, you know, I'm the golden boy. But what I do know is that, you know, a lot of the guys that are out there are willing to learn. They don't have everything in terms of collateral and what the current system requires for you to be a food security changer at your level, whatever the level. But, you know, you do have people who are really passionate about what they're doing, you know, as small as half a hectare and as big as 100 hectares. But again, I think the effort needs to go to say, who are those people? And they're there. But if you don't know about them, talk to those that do. You know, as someone who's working with farmers, over 2,000 farmers across the Eastern Cape province, it's a situation of, I know that there's 15 veggie farmers, there's 100 grain farmers in a specific area, that even if it means they're not commercially from a set-out perspective, but they've got a commercial mindset, because that's where mentoring comes in, and that's where the exposure of driving commercialization at that level will increase and obviously improve the food security level that we're sitting at, in my belief, at least from that lower level, given the fact that we're obviously, you know, one of the top countries, you know, from a commercial food security. So I think it's all about identification, but that identification is that you have to do the hard yards to go find them, because they do exist. So I think from there you'll start having a lot more, you know, players to as, you know, Kobus says, you know, farmers that can be qualifying to be looked at by Woolworths and the like. So I think the hard yards is that you're going to have to, you know, change the game plan if you want different results. And part of that change is to support the right person. And they are there. And if you don't know about them, talk to us who we do.
What are the appropriate networks to work through to identify those farmers? Do you think it is through the commodity organizations? Or do you have other suggestions of how that network can be formalized and better established?
No, look, you know, from my experience, it's a situation where, you know, as I said, the industry is doing a lot of work. And someone who's worked in the industry as an employee and someone who's gone out of the industry and stood by myself, which I say independent, it's a situation where you do have a lot of pockets of individuals who can stand up and say, support me, I'll drive the change that's being looked for. That's the first way. The second way is that, yes, obviously, because of the well-structured agricultural industry we have, and, you know, from data, from a Bfap perspective, you've got situations where farmers do exist on databases of various industries, industry bodies. So I think there's a lot of farmer data out there in terms of who's doing what where. I think it's a matter of making sure that you just support the, you know, as I say, you look for those candidates, but looking is a different thing. Going down and seeing where your money is being invested in and seeing the returns on that is also an important thing that various organizations or individuals who are doing this kind of work have to do. You have to do the legwork. And as you know, as a person who played rugby, I was told that by the coach that, you know, you have to do the hard yards before you send the ball out wide. So you have to do the legwork. You have to do the legwork because they do exist. And I think the current structures will give you those individuals, but they are individuals in their own capacities whom I think need to be looked into, just to improve the food security level of our province, or our country at least.
Okay, thank you. To now expand the discussion a bit out of South Africa and looking more towards the sub-Saharan African region. So we saw from Pratima and Tony's presentations that the bottom 10 on the index was dominated by sub-Saharan African countries. So Ali, what do you think as someone who has worked in various countries within this region, what role should South Africa play in promoting food security in the region, not just in South Africa, and what should the support look like from South Africa to the rest of the region?
Sure. Well, I think South Africa is already at that space. South Africa is already in that space. Is a regional, is the biggest regional player. So in terms of technology and all the things that we're talking about, all the inputs, all the know-how, that's all here. I mean, it's amazing what you have on the ground here. In terms of increasing, and of course, when we're talking about food security, let's be honest, we're talking about South Africa, of course, being the biggest, but also there's so many other markets that are looking to South Africa in terms of supplies, in terms of inputs, in terms of know-how, all of these things. So I think South Africa has an important role to play in that, of course, to play that role, and it is happening. So yeah, I think it's important to recognize that. Last week I was in Durban and visited a small, training facility on the outskirts of Durban, which provides, training, hands-on training. And this is something that the U.S. industry is actually supporting. I was amazed to learn that the participants that come to that center, come from different places, different countries within the region, not only from South Africa, and the knowledge and the information and the skills that they take back, not only to local, villages and to local areas, but beyond South Africa is making a huge difference. So I would say it's already there. Is enough being done? I mean, look, more can be done, of course, but it's happening.
Ali, one of the things that we saw that was really interesting during that has happened now during the pandemic is that, especially in the initial months, there was suddenly we saw a lot more protectionism in lots of countries trying to protect their own. And so in the South African context and looking at food security, do you think that will increase protectionism for South Africa, will increase import tariffs, for example, and other restrictions? Do you think such an approach can have a net positive effect on food security, or will it ultimately have a negative impact?
The clear answer to that is protectionism and restrictions impact food security negatively. That's very clear. Such measures would definitely have a negative impact on some of the pillars that we just talked about. Availability, affordability, those two of the four at least of the pillars of the food security global index data. So I think it's important to understand the measures and what the impact would be. This is to have a conversation on data-driven kind of information of what sort of impact is there to be, and that impact will make things more expensive, can impact supplies, and as we just talked about, it's not just South Africa; it's the whole region beyond South Africa. So I think it's crucial to look at those factors and those policies. And think about the impact before such measures are even taken into consideration. So my short answer is absolutely not. It's not protectionism and restrictions and barriers do not support food security.
Robert, would you also like to respond to that as a producer in South Africa, but also as an exporter? And compared to some of the countries that you trade with, do you think that South Africa needs better protections for local farmers?
I don't think we need protection as local farmer, but we need to see our government engaging with other governments to lower the protectionist policies that they have. For example, into Kenya, which is a huge gateway for us into Central Africa for apples, we're paying 40% duty. Into India, we're paying 40% duty. We counter seasonal to their apple season. So it's just a matter of government-to-government negotiations, and I don't think it falls under the Department of Agriculture, sorry, DG, but I think it falls under the Department of Trade and Industry. And we've successfully gained access for table grapes and apples into China. Pears, I think, is next on the list. Blueberries is also on the list. And, you know, if we can unlock these markets, you know, it's the world's our oyster. And if you look what Chile's got right, they have managed to negotiate the best trading terms. And their foreign embassies, that's their general focus, is to lower their tariffs and import duties in the countries where they're operating. Funny enough, I met a farmer in Chile who was the Chilean attaché to Japan. It took him 15 years to get the import tariffs down. So this is the timescale that we're working with, but it doesn't help, you know, think we're going to solve the problem tomorrow. It's a continuous process. The baton has to be handed on to the next person. And I think if there's anything the government could do to help the farmers, negotiating these tariffs down would be a huge help.
Thanks. We are going to slowly start wrapping up, so I'm going to come to the audience now for questions. But in the meantime, I just want to warn the audience that I am going to do a round of final thoughts and key takeaways that you think are specifically relevant to the industry in which you operate. So you can start to think about that a bit. Okay, thanks. Can we have the question here at the front?
Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Nadia Milan from the University of Johannesburg. You know, we're talking about, well, the 2 points. We're talking about food security. But food security is created not by volumes of production. It's about income. So we really need to understand that discussion is about increasing incomes in South Africa to improve that. And that then puts us back into the big picture of economic growth. But I think the question of farmer incomes is really the elephant in the room. And, you know, some of us know this, but farmers only receive, well, 28% globally of the final price of produce. And in South Africa, it's lower. It's up to 16, 18%. So the question is not about, you know, about producing more. It's about the farmer needs to create more income. But in that regard, it goes back to the bigger question. Our food market and system is so highly developed that the elasticity of food is so thin that the farmer just can't. Because if the farmer goes through the same system, he will receive only, well, sorry, I'm saying he 16%. So really, I think the question here is the innovation in our retail system. And I would like Mr. Abbey maybe to tell us a little bit. In America, they coupled the food stamps with farmers' markets financed by local governments. That gave farmers direct access to the consumer that increases their income. Can we not consider that in South Africa? Because else we are going to beat around the bush. We are not going to give farmers access to better paying markets. And maybe we need to listen to that story, because it spurred a whole local food movement in America, which is really, really interesting. Can I maybe ask you to elaborate on that? Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, that's you know, that's a good point. I mean, you know, I think it's important to, while you know, income is absolutely the crucial point for farmers. That there's no question about that. The different, you know, income streams that the farmer can get is what is going to drive this process. It's a major factor, no doubt about it. In the U.S., you know, in the U.S. system, there are programs that are, you know, different, you know, safety nets that are in place. Those safety nets are consistent with international commitments. I'm talking about the WTO and other commitments. So I'm not talking about subsidies here. What I'm talking about is safety nets, things like insurance, for example. All these climate issues and things that we're seeing today, wiping out a crop one time, you know, completely. What does the farmer do? You have to have some safety nets. And those safety nets, you know, you talked about the products going into some of the sectors like the school feeding program, so, sort of the domestic, you know, kind of markets. And, where people can buy. Those who are less, fortunate have access to food. It's a small area, but I think the more important area is these different safety nets that should be in place, that need to be in place in order for the farmer those who are in the business of farming to make a decent living. The risks associated, it's a very risky, I don't need to tell you that. Everybody knows how risk farming is. So unpredictable, huge risk. You need some safety nets. You need insurance. You need crop insurance. You need, different sort of tools that would hold the farmers when events happen. And those events are happening. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks. So we've got one more question here, and then I'll get to your question at the back and over there.
Thank you. My name is Donnie Brink. I'm from Agri-Sciences at Stellenbosch University. I have a question about the research and development funding. The background information of the index indicated it's slowing down, if not declining. Yet we're expanding the research agenda. Even the index have introduced a new category of sustainability and natural resources. We're shifting the priorities from availability, from availability to affordability and sustainability. Yet, what should we do to attract new R&D money coming in to underpin these dynamics? Because if we don't bring in new money, the only solution is the existing money will follow the priorities, and we will weakening platforms that has actually brought us to a fairly reasonable point of departure in the index. So I'm including universities into the solution, but what should we do collectively to attract new money to be able to follow the priorities, including the expansion of the R&D agenda?
Tony, I'm going to ask you to answer that question. I think just because you do also represent the agribusiness sector in South Africa and in the region, and you're also involved in research and development funding in South Africa. So, how would you answer that? How do we attract new money for research?
So I think earlier the question was also asked, what do you need in South Africa for any investor to come back here? So it's law and order. It's a predictability in terms of what's going to happen, which was referred previously. So a multinational obviously look at the environment where they invest and return on investment. I think the other important area, so farmers to compete worldwide need the best technology as early as they possibly can get. So when you bring a new molecule into South Africa, to register it, to get an efficient system to have it available in time for farmers, when you bring new genes into South Africa, how efficient is that process for registration and new products as well? So I think that it's a combination of several issues, but I think, first of all, when any investor comes to South Africa, they look at the economic and political stability that we have. Then secondly, when you bring the technology or genes into South Africa, can we efficiently deal with that to get it quick enough to the farmer, not by the time it becomes a generic, then you can get it released onto the market. So I think those would be key things. Maybe we can ask Pratima to talk about worldwide trends that we recently seen with developed countries where this index got negative as well. Pratima?
Yeah, Pratima, do you have some comments on what the 2021 index has shown in terms of the trends in research and development funding?
Yeah, so we did see, it's interesting because, of course, in developing countries and developed countries, we've seen that this trend was going quite strong or relatively strong from 2012 through to 2016. And then, of course, from 2016 through to the last 5 years, basically 2016 through to 2021, we're seeing it's slowed down a little bit. It's still relatively, well, flat, if not increasing very marginally in some of the middle and lower income countries, but at least in the developed countries, we see it slowed down a little bit. Part of this is because, of course, you're growing from a larger base, right, a higher base already. But that said, the issues I think that we're seeing sort of to the question that was asked, that some of the priorities need to be changing, or we need a little bit more guidance around the fact that there's going to be more sustainable investment, or what are some of the digital and tech innovative measures that can help support some of that, I guess, public investment or even private investment that needs to be clarified a little bit. So I think we're kind of at an inflection point almost in terms of the fact that we're seeing this flatten out a little bit, some clear policy guidance, motivation and commitment from all the other stakeholders, private sector, universities, everybody, to help sort of reverse some of that, can help accelerate that, I guess, environment and that landscape to attract more investment.
Thank you. And we had a question there at the back, and then one more question on my right-hand side, and then we're going to wrap up.
Yeah, I'm Johan Kotsia. My mummy says I'm beautiful, my wife also, but I'm a pig. So I'm representing the pig industry. And Mr. Ramasodi, the reason why we're not doing it is there's no meat included in that thing. If you did include the meat, we would better it. Just a comment. When I was a genuine pig and still in banking, I lived in Mozambique. And I think the unemployment rate was about 110%. But we still gave out loans. And I discovered something: we've missed the informal sector. I haven't seen the African informal sector. So just to go back to the pig industry, and I think Ferry can vote for that, when we did our calculations, we thought about 5 to 10% of the total formal pig industry is represented by informal pig producers. Just to find out it's nearly a 1-to-1. So the take is, I think we sometimes want to fight a battle with a concept out of a formal structure, which is to a certain extent represented in Europe, bring it back to Africa, and then we don't see, we overlook to a certain extent a great industry. And then we want to measure that industry according to the formal sector, and then we're not successful. I don't know what the pure answer is, but if I take the food conversion ratio of the formal sector and I want to impound that into the informal sector, I'm going to be a failure. The bad or the good, it depends on how you view it, is the informal sector in the pig industry makes more money than the formal people. We don't measure that. So my comment to what we see here is, I think we missed the opportunity to understand the informal sector and the impact thereof in Africa. I'm going to go back to Mozambique. If I needed to believe what I knew then out of the formal concept, I wouldn't have been a banker in Mozambique. And we still made good money. How is it possible? And the only reason for that is there's an informal sector with a massive contribution to a country like South Africa. We measure them out of a formal concept, and we miss the opportunity of understanding that market. Thank you.
Well, thanks for that, Johan. That's, yes, no, you can definitely applaud that, Yaku. I think that's so important. I think that's why the work that yourself and also that the RPO is doing with Bfap to better understand the informal sector in South Africa and its contribution overall to the economy and to food security is so important. And then ultimately, I think that can also provide better data sets for, as Pratima was saying earlier, that they do to a large extent rely on the data that is available in country. So I think as that data becomes available, hopefully we will see it reflected in research such as this index. And it also just reminds us that we must always support the proper funding of Statistics South Africa and not allow that very important institution to go underfunded. And then we've got one last question there at the right-hand side.
Thank you very much, and thank you, panel, for the wonderful comments. I'm Jenny Gielholmer from the Embassy of Finland. I'm the Agriculture Councillor there. This is more of a comment. and I'm glad that I'm finalizing this. I wanted to go back to basics and about food security. What is really, really important that our children get enough food. The kind of the fundamentals of a well-functioning society is that our children are fed. I know Robert mentioned and Mr. Abdi mentioned school feeding programs. One of the, okay, maybe a little backstory. I mean, Finland used to be really poor about 100 years ago. There was actually a famine because of the war, and how we are basically one of the most advanced countries globally at the moment because of our school feeding programs. Finland has the longest ongoing free school feeding from the kindergarten to the high school. So at the Food Systems Summit this year in New York, there was a wonderful initiative started by Finland and with some other like-minded countries. I think Germany was part of it, that's my colleague over here. And we managed to formalize a global school feeding coalition. And in fact, our Minister of Trade and Industry persuaded the Minister of Basic Education of South Africa to join the coalition. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but South Africa is part of this coalition. And one of the things in Finland, in the procurement of the food into our schools, it's very important to, well, actually one of the main points is to buy local. So kind of my question is here, how would the farmers work with the government to kind of ensure that the school feeding programs in South Africa will be a success in the future? And this is definitely, I mean, the smaller farmers could be also engaged in the programs to kind of get food to the local schools. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that question and for the information. Sinelizwe, I think you are the right person to respond to that. And how do you see this emerging as a real win-win for South Africa, where we can, on the one hand, support small-scale farmers by giving them a secure access, market access in terms of supplying food, school feeding schemes, while on the other hand, ensuring that children don't have to sit in school hungry?
It's quite something, and the reason why I say that is because, on the one hand, it's probably already happening, where even though statistically maybe the statistics aren't being viewed, as regularly with regards to the various projects and programs, because I mean, the agricultural industry at large, you would find that everyone in their little corner is involved in trying to improve, as I said in the earlier, their little environment. So I think for me, the situation is you unapologetically, if I may use that word, you're going to have to change the game plan of execution. By that I mean to say, you're going to have to be relentless in terms of funding the developing market. You're going to have to be unapologetic in terms of investing in the developing market. The same sort of drive and verve and zeal that you're getting, from a commercial perspective, take that and put it in the developing market. In that sense, you're going to get food production up, and then you won't have a nutritional problem of having, situations where, from a household level at least, income affords the household to be able to access various types of food and various nutritional food types. So, in my belief, I think that we've hit a point in this industry, as someone who's coming from the outside and is coming from a development space, where it just cannot be that we're just trotting along in this industry thinking that at this particular pace we're going to drive the change that needs to happen. We're going to have to be unapologetic in terms of investing in the developing space for better situations in terms of farmers who are looking to be producing for, as you say, feeding schemes and the like. It can happen. It is happening. Maybe it's not well documented, but it is happening, at least from my perspective down in the Eastern Cape. But it's a situation of it needs to continue. It just needs to be supported, along the way for however long it needs to take place for. So I think around there for me is do the right thing, have the same sort of commitment, unlocking the development space so that you try to achieve more production to achieve these food schemes in terms of food availability for the various schemes out there. I think that's the best way I would view it.
Thank you. Well, I mean, it's your decision. I'm still fine. I'm not hungry yet, but let's take 2 more questions and then we'll finish. So, Yaku, and then we'll come here to the center.
Thank you very much. It's more of a contribution than a question. And thank you for today. I think we're ignoring a jewel in our crown. And a lot of the questions that we are posing here is actually being answered every single day of our life. We are an entrepreneurial nation by nature, and we are ignoring our fresh produce markets as they stand. And we're very sorry, Ayanda, that you took the hospital pass to go to the land bank, because we sorely need you on Johannesburg fresh produce market. But what we've seen in terms of the value that central markets have, specifically our commission markets, it's that it converted the effort of small-scale farmers into cash the very next day. It doesn't need a subsidy. Whatever is produced today and sent to market is exposed to the free market and is delivered back tomorrow morning in the farmer's bank account without any restrictions. In terms of the price that is discovered, 87.5% is returned to a grower the next day or the day after until the consignment is completed. So I really think in terms of a lot of these questions, in terms of where small farmers' product goes to markets. I was in, my pronunciation is not good, Kune in the Eastern Cape last week on Friday. There's a small regional market there that adds so much value to the local community. It's incredible. Thousands of buyers are gathering to go to market, as well as the representation of small to large and commercial growers. And I really think we need to focus on the good that we have than trying sometimes to find new solutions to what we already got. And that's my little bit.
Okay, and our final contribution for today.
Hello, I'm Pete Engelbrecht from Limpopo. I'm a citrus farmer, and I just want to, Robert, just to contribute to you. You said that apples is a more upper class market, but I think if you pay out the salaries at the end of the month, that money goes back to the upcoming farmer, and they buy from the upcoming farmer, so it stays in the cycle. So and that is the point that I want to bring back to Mr. Ali from the US. Since the last 15 years, I'm more longer than that in the citrus industry, but for the last 15 years, we tried to get into the US market with citrus itself. And about 10 years ago, it was ready to written off and the agreement. And things like that, we've been up, and since then we are up and down on that 4 pillars of the food security. And we tick all the boxes, but we don't get there. So I think perhaps there's a gap that must be filled or must be narrowed, so that it's easier for us to contribute and to contribute to lower down. And I think that there is a solution in that also. Thank you, Denise.
Thanks. Ali, do you want to respond to that?
Well, thank you. Let me first of all say, I think not everybody is a citrus farmer, I'm assuming. You're coming from different places. So, 2020, this is last year, South Africa, citrus exports to the US reached a record high, highest ever. Okay? So that's a fact. So, so when we're talking about markets, not being, open and some technical issues are there, yes, absolutely there are. But I think it's important to look at this as a whole, right? So we do have some lingering, let's say, issues related to technical requirements. which have been addressed, right, on both sides. Plant health people from our side, Mr. Ramasody is over here, the DG. We work with the with the Department of Agriculture colleagues to look for ways to solve technical issues. And that has been ongoing for a while, for sure, on citrus. And we will continue to look for solutions, of course. And we're very much committed to that, to finding that. But I think it's important to recognize the big picture of the bilateral trade between South Africa and the U.S. Not only in citrus, but even, exports, last year, total exports to the U.S., record high, 2020, pandemic year. We just heard about all the consumption that's taken, the demand that's picking up, the consumption that's happening. So I think that's, it depends how you want to look at this. Is the glass half full or half empty? So as long as we continue to, I think, stay engaged and continue to those dialogues, I'm sure we'll find solutions. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. So we'll do a final round with take-home messages. We'll start with Pratima. I'm going to excuse you from final round. I think you've contributed more than your fair share. So thank you very much for the presentation and for the information you shared, and for joining us today virtually. And then Tony.
So just by the way, it's 12 o'clock at night in Singapore. So Pratima, thanks a lot for your time.
Thanks very much,
so
everyone.
let me conclude first. So I would say not one organization or one government department or one industry is going to make a difference. I would say it needs collaboration from banks, producers, organizations like Agri-SA. Everybody needs to take hands to move forward. One entity was not going to make a difference. And I think my second point would be that collaboration needs to be driven by insights from a data-driven model like the Food Security Index that we have. If it's data-driven, we'll take the right decisions and get the best impact on the shortest time period. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with Tony on the value chain. Everybody needs to play their part. And secondly is we need to be in farming, make sure that we drive out inefficiencies. We've got a program where we measure farmers on scientific data, and those farmers that's really improving their soil. Look after your soil, South Africa. It is going to be our saving grace. We've got some of the fantastic soil, but we need to look after that.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's very difficult to add something, but what I would like to add is that we need an environment where the barriers to entry are lower, not just for exporting into countries and getting tariffs down, but also for new farmers to enter the system, whether it's compliance with retailers. We need to have that support. Everybody needs that support. And I think the only way we're going to grow the agri-sector is we have to unlock more water. Being a water-scarce country, we need to build more dams, we need to have security, because the droughts are going to come again. That's a fact. So that would be my final.
I saw some footage today of the water streaming down the roads in George, and I just reacted like a beaver. I just wanted to start building dams to catch that water. Yanser, so you haven't had much of an opportunity today to contribute. I'm sorry about that. And
I could make up with it, Deneen, right now.
But you've got the floor now.
Deneen, I can't be succinct. I think there are three things that need to be said, and we should consider it very carefully. We have real hunger in this country. We have a third of our population that are hungry tonight, at least. We're wasting a third of our food. You know, that's a reality of the value chain as well. We need to polish up on that value chain. There's a lot of work to be done within the sector to make sure that we do that. Having said that, I think the sector has a lot of answers to provide as well. You asked me earlier about climate change and COP26. South Africa and our agricultural sector is the only sector that has contributed to halving its carbon footprint in our economy as a whole. from 8% to 4% over the last 15 years, and that's done through efficiency. And I think that's a valuable input and something that cannot be overemphasized and overstated. This is a sector where we make plans and we offer solutions, and I think that's something that government should take notice of. We really are in that position to make sure that we can offer those solutions. I think the other issue and the important one, coming back to the natural resources thing and the thing that, or the pillar that Tony alluded to, especially about water. I think again, this is where something where Agri-SA in particular has the solutions. We do have viable models to make sure that we hold people to account as far as water use is concerned, and making sure that contamination and pollution of our water resources is halted immediately. It's not that difficult, we can do it. I think I'll leave it at that, but from my side, I think we have solutions. We are a powerhouse in Africa as far as food security is concerned, but we have to be sensitive in everything that we think about, is that there's a reality out there of people going to bed tonight hungry.
Thanks, Yanser. Ali, your final thoughts?
Sure, thank you. I agree with really all the previous colleagues who spoke very eloquently about all the challenges, many of them. One element that I thought would really be, we didn't spend much time on, is, of course, we all recognize that increasing production is an absolute, something that has to be done. Given all the demand, the numbers, the population, you name it, right? So innovation is something that is agricultural innovation. I mean, those of you who are plant people know this very well. Innovation is something that has to continue to evolve. Technology, I'm talking about technological innovation on breeding and other tools that are necessary to increase production and safeguard all the the commodities that you produce. So in this area, gene editing, genome editing, this is really the cutting edge, the next phase of really protection and plant protection, improving yield, and so on. So I think it's important to, and South Africa is a major leader. He's a big leader in this space. All the talent is here. Definitely South Africa is a powerhouse in this space. So my point is, this is something to keep in mind as, in terms of developing rules and regulations with regard to that. Really, these need to be in the forefront of making sure that the rules do not stifle innovation, which South Africa is leading. That's critical. So that would be my my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Sonalisa, your take-home message from today.
Yeah, I think it's encouraging to obviously know that as a country, from a food security level, we're pretty much up there. Obviously, a lot more needs to be done. So I think farmers on the ground just keep on keeping on, as tough as it is, because I suppose there's only us who can actually do it as producers. That's the first thing, and I think the other thing is alluding to the gentleman from the pig industry. We can't carry on ignoring the informal market. You cannot, for the life of me, carrying on ignoring and not investing as passionately in the informal and developing market. And yes, there's obviously been problems. There hasn't been big success stories, but I think it's high time that as an industry, we look where the problem is, and that is in poor provinces. That's where you'll find high levels of food insecurity. And I think it's high time that as an industry, in partnership with government and various stakeholders, that's where we need to be pumping the investment through. And I think my take-home message is, it is alive, it's working, it just needs more investment. Thanks.
You. And Ayanda, then the final thought from the Land Bank.
No, it's not from the Land Bank. The Land Bank is healing its wounds. You know, there was a year where I presented to the market agents the statistics of the fresh produce market in Joburg. And we had about 7,000 farmers who had a turnover of about 7.8 billion rands. Now that sounds good when you leave it there. But 400 of those farmers controlled 6-point-something billion, can't remember the exact number, of that turnover. And the balance, which is 6,000 plus, shared in the 2 billion. And then that's where the problem starts to reveal itself. We've got a huge, underdeveloped, small to medium-sized sector of farmers who need the support. And at times, not all of us, some of us, but let me make the point anyway. Every commercial farmer today has been a developing farmer. They have received support. We have to do what we have to do as government to support them. But every commercial farmer has a responsibility to lift as they rise. Because the war of funding that particular number, I think, sir, you said it's over 300,000 of those farmers, is sitting with the potential of solving some of the unemployment issues in this country. Then the land bank. The land bank has a responsibility to stitch itself back to its mandate. A lot of things have happened, a lot we are trying to fix, a lot of non-performing loans that are not being paid, lie some in this room. And those things do impact how we are able to fund the sector. So on a different day, we'll discuss land bank, but we're not here for that. Today, we're here to discuss issues of food security. And I can only say with this summary, everything is interlinked. Everything joins together somewhere. And it's for us to find that silver lining. So it's true, we must be resolute about development. Because in a few years to come, we'll be asked questions. What did you do with that developing sector? And it will be the one that's rioting because it's not getting support. Thanks.
Thanks for that. Thanks for everyone's final thoughts. We're going to go over to the closure. That's going to be handled by Christo van der Rede, the Executive Director of Agri SA. Christo, I'm just going to say my final farewell and to thank Corteva Agri and also Agri SA for giving me the opportunity to guide the program today. It was a very challenging discussion, and I think we must all go home with that image and that reality check that Yanser gave us to know that what we are talking about here is millions of South Africans going to bed hungry tonight. And I want everyone in this room to never forget the important role that you play in changing that. If you're a farmer, a banker, a researcher, a diplomat, whatever your role is, it's incredibly important that each part of the system works, that each part of the system works better. And remember that when you work, remember that when you grow tired, remember that when you think that there's not enough gratitude for what you are doing. And the gratitude might not always come from podiums and platforms, but imagine the gratitude of one more family or a few more people that are less hungry tomorrow because of work that you are able to do today, because of the position that you are in. And also remember to be grateful when you leave this room and you can indulge in some snacks and something to drink, that we are some of the lucky few in South Africa, and that's why the responsibility rests on us to change things. So thanks again, and thank you to the panel for a very interesting and engaging discussion. Do you want the panel up here with you?
Yeah, no, let him sit here, Thank you, Deneen. I think you've done a remarkably good job. Let's give her another round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Let me just thank a few people individually. Let me start with Kobus. Thank you very much for your contribution this afternoon. Robert Kraft, thank you very much, all the way from the Western Cape. Yanser Robbie, also from the Western Cape, that's my province. And then also Mr. Ali Abdi. Thank you very much. We've engaged now for a couple of times. Now we trust that we will be able to take this forward. Also, Zinelizwe, thank you very much for being here this afternoon. I really enjoyed your insights, and you're a remarkable farmer. I watch you on social media with all your tractors and your maize and things like that, and I really admire you. And then my friend, this is my friend, Mr. Ayanda Kanana. When he saw me, he says, "You're the one that gives me all the problems." I said, "That's tough love." You know. So Ayanda, thanks very much for being here. And we're really there to assist you. I think don't regard, the criticism that comes from the sector as being vindictive. I think we all try to find a collective solution. And I think you find yourself in a very, very tough space. So on one hand, you between the devil and the blue sea. There's Treasury on the one side, there's the farmers on the other side, and we in the middle, trying to get a go at you. I've done Deneen Erasmus and then Tony. Yes, there's Tony, our big friend. Tony, without Koteva's assistance today and without this partnership, this would not have been possible. So really, let's give them a nice hand. And then Pratima Singh, she was the only female here today, ladies and gentlemen. I think we need to fix that, right? We need to fix that. I want to recognize, I've seen some beautiful ladies here today. I hope my wife doesn't hear this. But I think I want to recognize Leona over here, a leader in her own right. Also, Johanne Isaacs, former DG from the Western Cape. Also, Dr. Samela, she was also around. And all the other ladies that are in the building. Next time round, I will make personally sure that we have some ladies also on these panels. And it's not something that we just do for the sake of doing it. I think as we build a non-sexist and a non-racist society, we need to deal with it. We need to fix it, right? Give me a hand, please. Then the President, Africa, Middle East, Kotiva Agri-Science, Mr. Venkata Kolli, also thank you very much for your contribution. Then also to Jaco Minnar, our President, we are really proud of your contribution, Jaco. There's Phineas Gumede, our Vice President. Phineas, perhaps you can just stand. And then also Nicole Jansen in his absence. Then we have a lot of board members here, as well as leaders of our various affiliates that are here. We are really glad that you have shared this afternoon with us. And then also the leadership of TAU, that's Benny. Benny van Zyl also. Also, I see some members of AFASA present and NAFU. We are really happy that you are sharing this afternoon with us. And then Mr. Ramasori. Thank you very much, sir. I think between Agri-SA and your office, we're really there to take your hand, to assist you. This is a tough road that you have embarked upon. It's not an easy job, but I think as an industry, we need to collaborate and we need to share solutions, and we need to really take your hand in this regard. And then also please convey our sincerest gratitude to Minister Toko Didiza. And then Mr. Todd Haskell, he is from the Embassy of the United States. He opened up the proceedings this afternoon. All of our online guests, our ambassadors present, high commissioners, members from the diplomatic community, all the government representatives, all of our other guests from the various universities, thank you very much. But also our staff. Where's our staff? Let them please stand. Eloise, all of you, all of the staff of Agri-SA, you stand up. This is not a request, this is an instruction. We are super proud of what you've done today. And where's Yolanda? There at the back. Yolanda has played a critical role in putting this all together. Yolanda, our sincerest appreciation. You're leaving us one of these days, and we will deal with that institution that have robbed you from us. But thank you very much for what you've put together. Let's give her a nice hand. I see Omri van Zyl, also our CEO of Gfsi Enterprises. They are the people who are doing the development work. So Omri, also welcome, and I trust that you will make friends with all of the people around here. It seems to me they've got lots of money. So on that high note, ladies and gentlemen, it's always a privilege. We serve you. We serve the industry. And I'm heading up Gfsi, and it's not an easy task. But these are the types of moments that I really treasure, because this is where we know that our role is to bring people together. Our role is to mobilize people for the betterment of this country and the betterment of the African continent, and yes, to create a better world at the end of the day. And our job is to make sure that we lay solid building bricks, solid foundations on which we can build a legacy for the next generation to come. Have a good afternoon. We've got some nice, I think, some extra food outside. And then if you smile with me, we also have a bar that is open somewhere in the building. Okay, only soft drinks. Yeah, Gfsi has really gone to the pits, but that's fine. Please enjoy your day further, and be safe. Thank you.